Let your shoulders sink just a little into whatever cradles you tonight. Loosen the small, hidden tensions you may not have noticed you were holding. The gentle clench of the jaw, the quiet weight behind the eyes. Breathe in slowly, slowly, as though drawing in the cool, mossy air of a forgotten English meadow at twilight, and let it out softer still. Imagine, if you would, a narrow path of pale, worn stones, half swallowed by long grass that whispers as it brushes against itself. The path curls gently between two low hills, hills so old they have long since rounded into the shapes of sleeping animals, soft and patient. A thin mist drifts low, knee-high, hushing every footstep before it can be made. Somewhere far ahead, almost too distant to be certain, there comes a sound. A rhythm. A slow, steady ringing of metal upon metal. Patient, unhurried, like a heartbeat rendered in iron. Tonight, that sound is calling you backward through 900 years, into the soft amber lamplight of a tiny English village where the air smells of wood smoke and warm bread, where the cobbles glisten faintly with dew, and where time itself seems to move at the pace of a candle flame. You are perfectly safe here. Nothing is asked of you. There is no place you must reach, no task you must complete. Simply walk, in your imagination, toward that gentle hammer song, and let the 12th century rise quietly around you, like steam from a clay cup of warm honeyed milk. Before we step beneath the wooden archway at the village edge, before we feel the cool stone of the gatepost beneath an imagined fingertip, allow me a single, soft moment. If the cadence of this voice has already begun to slow your breathing, if the picture of that distant hammer ringing through the mist has loosened something tight inside your chest, then know that this little corner of the past was made for you. It was shaped hour by hour, scene by scene, so that you might rest more deeply tonight than you have in many nights before. Should you wish for more journeys like this one, more drifting walks through candlelit monasteries, more long evenings beside Tudor hearths, more whispered tours of Roman bathhouses and Saxon longhouses, you are welcome to stay close. A quiet tap of the small bell beside this story, a gentle following of the path, ensures that the next sleepy lantern will find you waiting in the dark whenever you need it. There is no urgency in this, no bright voice calling for your attention, only a soft invitation, offered the way a villager of long ago might offer a stranger a cup of warm broth at the threshold of a cottage. Take it, or do not. Either way, the road remains open, and now, with that small kindness spoken, let us return to the path. The mist is still drifting. The hammer is still ringing. The village is still waiting beyond the hawthorn hedge, its single curl of wood smoke rising lazily into a sky the colour of old pewter. Step gently with me, and onward we go. The hawthorn hedge that marks the village edge has grown for longer than any living soul can remember. Its branches twist and braid themselves into one another with the slow patience of things that have nowhere else to be, and its small dark leaves carry a faint dusting of evening dew that catches the last grey light of the sky in a way that makes the whole hedge seem softly luminous, as though it were lit gently from within. Beneath your feet the path narrows, and the pale stones give way to packed earth, the colour of old tea, smooth from the passage of bare feet, leather sandals and the small, careful hooves of village goats. The archway itself is little more than two crooked posts of weathered oak, leaning toward one another like old companions caught mid-conversation, and a single horizontal beam laid across their tops, half furred with pale grey-green lichen. There is no gate to swing open. There is no guard to hail. The village trusts the hedge, the dusk, and the quiet good faith of travellers, and so the way is simply, gently open. As you pass beneath the beam, you might trail an imagined fingertip along the underside of the wood, feeling the soft fibrous texture where centuries of weather have lifted the grain into tiny ridges, each one no thicker than a thread of wool. There is the faintest scent of old rain held in the timber, mingled with the dry sweetness of lichen, and somewhere beneath that the deep resinous memory of the oak itself. The wood is cool to the touch, and the cold travels gently up through your fingers and into your wrist, like a small and welcome shiver. Beyond the archway, the village reveals itself in slow, patient layers. First, a single cottage, low and humble. Its walls of cob daub the colour of warm honey where the lamplight inside leaks through a half-shuttered window, and the colour of mushroom stem grey where it does not. The roof is thatched with rye straw, golden in patches, blackened in others, and along its ridge a row of hand-bent hazel rods has been woven into a simple decorative pattern that looks, in the dimming light, like the spine of some long sleeping creature. Beyond that first cottage another, and beyond that another still. They are arranged not in the orderly rows of later centuries, but in the soft organic clustering of dwellings that grew slowly, one beside another, as families married and split and built and rebuilt across the long quiet generations. The gaps between them are narrow, sometimes no wider than a wool merchant's outstretched arms, and these gaps fill with shadow now as evening settles, soft purple shadow, the colour of bruised plums. Threading between the cottages, the village lane curves gently, never quite straight, never quite revealing what lies ahead. The cobbles here are larger than those of the path outside, set deeper into the earth, polished by years of cartwheels and footfalls until their tops gleam, dark and wet-looking, even in dry weather. Between the stones, soft moss has crept in, and small tufts of common chickweed, and here and there the tiny pale stars of stitchwort, closing themselves now for the night. The air has a particular quality to it that you may not have known you were missing. There is no whisper of distant engines, no faint electric hum, no glow of artificial light to dilute the dusk. There is only the sound of a single wood pigeon calling once, twice, from somewhere within the elm tree at the village centre, and the soft creak of a wooden water bucket swinging gently on its rope as a goodwife walks home with the last draw of the evening's water. You can smell the village now properly, fully. The scent reaches you in soft layers, one folding over the next. There is the warm, earthy fragrance of wood smoke drifting from a dozen small hearths, each fire fed with apple wood or oak or sweet old beech, depending on what the household has gathered. Beneath the smoke, the round comforting smell of barley pottage simmering slowly in iron pots. Beneath that, the green, grassy scent of fresh-cut hay drying in the open shed of the croft to your left. And beneath all of it, faint but unmistakable, the sharp, clean, almost metallic tang that drifts from the smithy at the far end of the lane, the scent of hot iron, of charcoal, of the slow, patient transformation of stone-born metal into useful, beautiful things. It is this scent, more than any other, that draws you onward. Your feet, in their imagining, carry you gently down the lane, past a low stone wall topped with mossy capstones, past a small wattle pen where a sleepy ewe lifts her head to consider you with mild, patient eyes before lowering it again to her hay, past a cottage doorway where a tabby cat sits with her paws tucked neatly beneath her, her amber eyes half closed, her purring almost audible in the stillness. A child's voice rises briefly from one of the cottages, high and clear, asking some small question in the soft, lilting Middle English of this particular corner of the kingdom. You cannot quite make out the words, but the tone is unmistakable. The gentle rising lilt of a question asked at bedtime, perhaps about a story or a missing wooden toy, or whether the morning will bring fresh bread. A mother's voice answers, low and warm, and the small voice falls quiet, content. The lane curves once more, and now the heart of the village comes into view. There is a small green, perhaps 30 paces across, irregular in shape, its grass cropped short by sheep and geese during the day, and now empty in the gathering dusk. At its centre stands the elm, vast and ancient, its trunk so wide that 3 grown villagers linking hands could not quite encircle it. Its bark is deeply furrowed, the ridges and valleys forming a topography all their own, and in the deeper grooves, tiny ferns and feathery mosses have made their homes. From the lower branches of the elm hangs a single iron bell, no larger than a child's head, its surface dark with age and weather. It is the village bell, the one rung for births, for weddings, for the calling in of the harvest, for the rare and rumoured approach of a stranger. Tonight it is still and silent, and the rope that hangs from its tongue sways only the smallest amount in the soft evening breeze. Beyond the green, a track leads off toward the smithy, and you can see now properly for the first time the warm orange glow that pulses faintly from within. The forge fire is being banked for the night, but the iron has not yet given up its heat, and the low light of it spills out through the open doorway and across the cobbles, painting them in shades of bronze and copper and faded gold. The hammer song has slowed, you notice, as though the smith himself is settling into the long, quiet rhythm of the day's end. You stand for a moment at the edge of the green, breathing in the wood smoke and the hay and the distant iron, letting the village arrange itself around you, letting your imagined eyes adjust to the soft new colours of dusk. There is no hurry, there is nowhere else to be. The 12th century has opened its hawthorn gate to you, and the night, soft as a folded woolen blanket, is just beginning. Let us linger here a while on the soft edge of the green and consider the cottages themselves, for they are small marvels, each one, and they will reveal more to you the longer you allow your gaze to rest upon them. They are not built so much as they are grown, drawn slowly out of the very land on which they stand, and every part of them carries the memory of the field, the wood, the quarry, the river bend from which it came. Look first at the walls. They are made of cob, that ancient and beautiful mixture of subsoil clay, fresh straw, water, and sometimes a measure of cow dung worked together by the bare feet of the villagers themselves on a long summer's day. The mixing is done in a shallow pit dug close to the building site, and it is heavy, slow work, the kind of work that turns a whole afternoon into a patient rhythm of tread, fold, until the mixture is the right consistency, smooth and pliant, the colour of damp earth fresh from a riverbank. The wall before you, the western wall of the nearest cottage, is perhaps 2 feet thick at its base, tapering very slightly as it rises. Its surface has been smoothed with the flat of a wooden trowel and then lime-washed 3 or 4 times across the years, so that its colour is now a soft, milky cream, pale and gentle in the gathering dusk. Where the lime-wash has worn thin, you can see the warmer honey colour of the cob beneath, and where rain has streaked the surface over many seasons, faint pale lines run down from the eaves like the tracks of slow tears. Run your imagined hand across the wall. The texture is unlike any modern surface you have known. It is not smooth like plaster, nor rough like concrete, but somewhere gentler than either, with the faintest fibrous quality where tiny ends of straw catch your fingertips. It is cool but not cold. It holds the warmth of the day at its core, and releases it slowly through the long evening, the way certain old stones do, and the way certain old people do also. The window beside you is small, no larger than a folded shawl, and it has no glass. Glass is rare in this century, costly and reserved for churches and the halls of lords. Instead, the window is closed at night by 2 wooden shutters, each carved from a single plank of riven oak, hung on simple iron pintles, their inner faces darkened by years of hearth smoke. A length of waxed linen, oiled until it is nearly translucent, has been stretched across the window opening and tacked to the frame, and through it, in the daylight hours, a soft, buttery light enters the cottage, gentle as the inside of a candle's flame. Above the window, the eaves of the thatch sweep down low, almost to the height of a tall man's head, so that the entire cottage seems to hunch its shoulders against the weather. The thatch itself is a wonder, and your eye travels up across it slowly, taking in its layered, almost feathered texture. The thatcher who made it was a master of his craft, and you can see his work in the way each handful of straw has been laid in careful overlap with its neighbour, butt end down, tip end angled outward, so that water flows always away from the wall. The straw is rye, harvested at the end of summer, threshed gently to keep its long stems unbroken, then dried slowly in shocks in the field. It is golden where it is new, near the ridge, and a deep dark brown lower down, where the years have weathered it. In the very oldest patches near the eaves at the back of the cottage, a fine green moss has crept across the surface, and small ferns no longer than a finger have rooted themselves in the cool damp. The thatcher will not remove them. They are old friends now. The doorway of the cottage stands slightly open, just a hand's breadth, the way a doorway stands when those inside are settling in for the evening, but have not yet shut themselves wholly away from the world. The door itself is made of 3 vertical planks of seasoned oak, joined by 2 horizontal battens on the inside, the whole held together with hand-forged iron nails whose heads have been hammered into rough, flat domes about the size of a cherry stone. The door's surface is dark with age and with the smoke that drifts past it from the hearth, and the wood has acquired that deep satiny sheen that only old wood acquires, polished by the touch of many hands across many years. At the height where a hand would naturally fall, the wood is darker still, almost black in places, and worn into a faint smooth concavity, the negative shape of generations of palms pushing the door open and pulling it closed again. To touch this place in your imagining is to touch 1,000 small ordinary moments of arrival and departure. Above the doorway set into the cob just beneath the eaves is a small protective charm, a sprig of rowan tied with red thread to a tiny iron horseshoe nail. The villagers of this century live in a world rich with quiet superstitions, and rowan, with its bright berries and its toothed leaves, is believed to ward off the kinds of misfortune that travel on cold winds at night. The thread has faded to the colour of dried roses, and the rowan itself is brittle and grey, but it has not been replaced because to replace it would be to break the long thread of protection that has hung there since the cottage was first raised. The roof beams, which you cannot see from outside but which you may imagine, are made of whole, slender tree trunks, peeled of their bark and seasoned for 2 years before being raised. They were felled in the nearby wood, dragged to the building site by patient oxen, and lifted into place by a gathering of neighbours in a single long day, the kind of day that ended with bread and ale and song around a small bonfire. The marks of the adze that smoothed them can still be felt by anyone who runs a hand along their length, soft scallops of texture, the rhythm of a craftsman's arm caught permanently in the wood. The smoke from the cottage's hearth does not rise through a chimney, for chimneys like glass are still rare in this century and reserved for the dwellings of the wealthier folk. Instead, the smoke rises through a small opening in the thatch above the central hearth, called a smoke louvre, lined with a little wooden hood to keep the rain out. From the outside, this louvre is hard to see, but you can sense it by the soft column of wood smoke that lifts straight up into the still air, blue-grey, fragrant and slow, like a thought released into the dusk. Each cottage along the lane has been built in a slightly different way, by different hands in different seasons, across the long span of the village's existence. Some are older, their cob darker, their thatch deeper. Some are newer, raised in the past decade, their lines cleaner, their limewash brighter. But all of them share the same essential gentleness of form, the low walls, the deep eaves, the small windows, the hunched and patient shape, as though the whole village were a flock of soft, sleeping creatures gathered around the central green for warmth and company through the long, slow nights of the medieval year. The track that leads from the green to the smithy is short, perhaps 50 paces, and it slopes very gently downward, for the smithy has been built, as smithies always are, a little apart from the rest of the dwellings. The reason is practical, and it is also poetic. Practical because the constant fire of the forge, fed and tended through every working day, is a danger to the close-packed thatch of the village, and the smith and the village elders agreed long ago that a margin of green grass and packed earth between hammer and home was a wise and gentle precaution. Poetic, because there is something fitting about the way the smithy sits a little aside from the world, a little closer to the wood, a little closer to the river, as though it belongs partly to the village and partly to the older, wilder things from which iron itself is drawn. The track is bordered on either side by a low fence of woven hazel, the rods bent and twisted into a soft, undulating pattern by the hands of the smith's apprentice 3 summers past. The hazel has weathered to a soft silvery grey, and small spiders have spun their late-season webs between the rods, the webs gleaming faintly in the last of the dusk like strands of carded wool laid out to dry. Beyond the fence on the left, a small kitchen garden has been planted, a rectangle of dark-turned earth set with neat rows of leeks, their blue-green leaves leaning slightly in the evening breeze, and a bushy patch of common sage, its leaves the soft grey-green of sea mist on a winter morning. On the right, beyond the fence, a small stand of alder trees grows close to the streamlet that turns aside here from the larger river, a streamlet so narrow you could step across it in a single stride. The alders are dark and slender, their leaves nearly black in the failing light, and beneath them the ground is soft with fallen catkins and the spongy dampness of moss. The smith chose this place for the smithy because of the streamlet, for water is needed always at the forge for the quenching of hot iron, for the mixing of clay used to line the hearth, for the cooling of the leather apron and the hot stone of the floor on summer afternoons. The smithy itself comes into view as the track curves around a tall stand of nettle and elderflower, and your imagined breath catches a little, for it is a beautiful and humble building. It is larger than the cottages of the village, perhaps twice the floor area, but lower in profile, with a single great open doorway that faces away from the prevailing west wind. The walls are not of cob but of stone, rough-cut blocks of local sandstone the colour of warm bread crust, set in a thick mortar of lime and river sand. The stone has been chosen for its resistance to fire, for the smith knows, as every smith knows, that an errant spark in a thatched wall can undo a lifetime of work in a single dreadful afternoon. The roof is thatched, as the rest of the village is thatched, but the thatch here has been laid more thinly than is usual, and beneath it, on the inner faces of the rafters, a layer of fresh green turfs has been laid as a firebreak. From the outside you cannot see this. You can see only the soft golden roof, deeper and richer in colour than the cottage thatches, for it is newer, and has not yet had time to weather to the brown of old hay. The doorway is broad enough for 2 men to pass through abreast, or for a horse to be led inside for shoeing on a wet morning. It has no door, properly speaking, only a heavy curtain of oiled leather that hangs from a wooden bar across the top, and which can be pulled aside in working hours and let down on cold nights. Tonight the leather is pushed half aside, tied back with a length of plaited horsehair rope, and the warm orange light from within spills out across the threshold and onto the cobbles, painting them in long, dancing stripes of bronze and shadow. You step closer, in your imagining, and now you can hear the soft, slow sounds of the forge at the day's end. The bellows are not being worked, but there is the gentle settling sound of charcoal in the hearth, a soft tick, 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 as the embers cool unevenly, and somewhere within the building the slow drip of water from a cooling trough where a finished piece is finishing its long quench. There is the faint creak of a wooden beam shifting with the changing temperature of evening, and beneath all of this, the soft, contented breathing of the smith himself, somewhere unseen, perhaps wiping his hands upon a length of sackcloth, perhaps standing at his bench and turning over a finished horseshoe, considering it. The scent that drifts from the smithy is unlike any other scent in the village. It is warm, first of all deeply warm, the warmth of long-burnt charcoal carried out on the evening air. It carries the sharp, clean tang of hot iron, a scent that is almost mineral, almost earthy and yet entirely its own, like the smell of stone after a thunderstorm. Beneath that, the soft, sweet scent of beeswax, for the smith uses beeswax to seal and polish his finest work, and a small pot of it sits always on a shelf above the hearth. Beneath that still, the leather of his apron, dark and supple from years of wear, smelling of tannin and of honest sweat. You step closer still, and now you can see into the smithy itself. The hearth is built against the far wall, a great waist-high construction of stone and clay, its mouth perhaps the width of a man's outstretched arms. The fire within has been banked for the night, the charcoal raked into a low mound and covered with a thin layer of ash to keep it slumbering until morning, and yet a deep, soft orange glow pulses at its centre, the way the heart of a sleeping creature pulses, slow and patient and certain. To one side of the hearth stands the anvil, a great block of iron set upon a section of oak trunk so massive and so old that the trunk has darkened to nearly black, and the iron of the anvil has been polished to a soft mirror-like sheen across its working face by the hammers of 2 generations. The anvil's horn curves out gracefully on one side, and a small square hole, called the hardy hole, has been cut into its top to receive the various small chisels and cutters of the smith's trade. Around the walls of the smithy hang the tools, each in its own appointed place. There are tongs of many shapes, some short and stubby, some long and slender, each made for a particular grip on a particular kind of work. There are hammers, the great sledges and the smaller crossbeams, their heads dark with use, their handles polished to a soft golden sheen by the smith's palms. There are files and rasps, chisels and punches, and a long row of the various pieces of stock iron that the smith works with, rods and bars and flat strips, each waiting its turn to be heated, drawn, bent, and finished into something useful. The smithy is silent now, but it is not asleep. It is only resting, and the resting of a forge is one of the most peaceful resting in the world. Step gently across the threshold, in your imagining, into the soft amber air of the smithy. The leather curtain brushes briefly against your shoulder as you pass beneath it, and the texture of it on that imagined contact is supple and warm, almost living the way well-tended leather always feels, holding within itself the memory of every day it has spent guarding this doorway against rain and wind and the bright midday sun. The floor, you notice, is not of beaten earth, as it is in the cottages, but of wide flat stones, set close together and mortared at their edges with a pale clay that has hardened almost to the consistency of pottery. The stones are the colour of old ivory in the centre of the room, where feet have polished them across the years, and a deeper grey at the edges, where the dust of charcoal and iron filings has settled into their pores. They are warm beneath an imagined foot, gently warm the way a stone bench in a sunny courtyard is warm, an hour after the sun has set, holding the heat of the day's long work, and releasing it patiently into the cooling evening. There is a great wooden beam that runs the length of the room overhead, and from it hang small iron hooks at regular intervals, perhaps a hand's breadth apart. From these hooks are suspended bundles of the smith's smaller stock, slender rods and strips of iron hung up to keep them dry, and away from the rust that creeps so eagerly upon any metal left lying on the floor of any building anywhere. The bundles sway just barely in the soft draught from the hearth, and they make, between them, a faint, quiet music, a barely audible chiming, as gentle as the sound of distant bells heard through fog. To your right, against the wall closest to the door, stands the great wooden bench at which the smith does his finishing work. It is a beautiful bench, hewn from a single thick slab of oak, its surface scarred and gouged and marked by 10,000 small accidents of work, each scar a memory of a chisel that slipped, a hammer that missed its mark, a hot piece of iron set down too quickly. The wood between the scars is dark, nearly black in places where iron filings have rubbed into the grain and oxidized across the years, and where beeswax and oil and the patient warmth of the smith's elbows have polished the surface to a soft satiny sheen. Upon the bench lie several pieces of recent work. There is a horseshoe, freshly cooled, its surface still bearing the soft grey-blue patina of metal that has only just emerged from the heat. The shoe is small, made for a pony rather than a draught horse, and the smith has worked it with care, the 8 nail holes punched in a perfect crescent, the calkins at the heel turned out at exactly the correct angle, the toe clip drawn up cleanly, no thicker than a fingernail. You may imagine running an imagined fingertip along the curve of it, and feeling the faint warmth still held in its substance, and the perfect smoothness where the smith's hammer has finished it. Beside the horseshoe, a row of nails, perhaps 30 of them, laid out in a neat line. They are the kind of nails used for shoeing horses, slim and tapered with small flat heads, and each has been hand-forged by the smith from a single short length of stock iron. The making of such nails is one of the small daily labours of his life, the sort of task he does in the lulls between larger pieces of work, when the forge is too hot to leave but no commissioned piece is awaiting his attention, and so he draws out nail after nail, hour after quiet hour, until a small steady mound of them grows in the wooden box at the end of the bench. Further along the bench a small wooden box of curious shape, rectangular, with a sliding wooden lid worn smooth at its edges. Inside this box, you may know, the smith keeps his most precious small things, his finest files, his measuring sticks marked with notches at the standard inch and finger breadth, a small whetstone of fine grey shale, and a tiny pot of the precious oil he uses to anoint his most delicate work. The box itself is older than the smith, older than his father, given to the family by a wandering ironworker from the north many decades ago, and its corners have been mended once with small bands of brass. Upon the wall above the bench a row of pegs, and from each peg a tool. The hammers come first, perhaps a dozen of them, in graduated sizes from the great two-handed sledge that hangs at the far end, used only for the heaviest work, down to the small jeweller's hammer at the near end, no longer than a man's forefinger, used for the most delicate finishing. Each hammer's head is dark and pitted with use, and each handle is polished to a different shade of gold, depending on which hand has held it most often and for what tasks. Beside the hammers, the tongs, there are at least 20 pairs, perhaps more, and each pair has a different shape of jaw, designed to grip a different kind of work. Some are flat-jawed for holding sheet iron, some are V-shaped for gripping rods. Some have curved jaws almost like little cupped hands for holding round work or hot horseshoes. Some are very long with handles nearly the length of a man's arm for reaching deep into the heart of the hearth fire, and some are short and stubby for delicate work close to the bench. They hang in pairs from their pegs, and in the soft light of the dying hearth, they look almost like a row of strange patient birds perched and waiting. The chisels and punches occupy their own space, set into a wooden rack at one end of the bench, each slipped into its own slot, head up, business end down. There are cold chisels for cutting iron at room temperature, and hot chisels for cutting iron when it glows orange. There are punches with round tips, square tips, oval tips, each used to drive holes through hot metal or to mark patterns into finished work. The smith made each of these tools himself, drawing them out from stock iron in his quieter mornings, and each is exactly the shape that his own hand prefers, a little different from the tools of the smith in the next village, and a little different again from the tools of the smith 2 valleys away. In the corner, almost hidden in shadow, stands a great wooden barrel, half filled with water. This is the slack tub, the quenching trough, where hot iron is plunged to be cooled rapidly when the smith's work requires it. The water within is dark, nearly black, its surface skinned with a fine grey film of ash and iron dust that drifts upon it like the surface of a small, secret pond. The smell that rises from the slack tub is unmistakable, a sharp, mineral, almost flinty smell, not unpleasant but quite distinct, and it mingles with the warmer scents of charcoal and beeswax in a way that is, to anyone who has ever loved a smithy, the very smell of memory itself. Near the slack tub, leaning against the stone wall, a small pile of finished work awaiting collection by its owners. There is a long iron strap, the kind used to bind a wooden chest which old Wilfred the carpenter ordered some weeks ago and has not yet collected. There is a delicate hinge of fine work, no larger than a hand, made for the door of the priest's small ambry in the parish church. There is a long-handled pot-hook for hanging a cooking vessel above a hearth. Each of these things waits patiently in the shadow, its work done, its life of usefulness yet to begin, the soft dust of the smithy settling upon it like a quiet blessing through the long, slow, beautiful evening. Let us return now, gently to the village green, for there is much yet to consider in this small open heart of the settlement, and the night is still young, and the air is cool and soft against your imagined skin. As you turn back from the smithy and walk slowly up the gentle slope of the track, the smithy's warm orange glow fades behind you, and the deeper blue-grey of the gathering night settles around you like a loose-folded shawl. The green itself, you may now appreciate fully, is the true centre of the village. It is not large, perhaps 30 paces across at its widest point, and its shape is irregular, more like a soft kidney bean than a true circle. Its grass has been cropped close by the village's small flock of sheep and by the always watchful village geese. And beneath the grass, the earth is firm, packed by centuries of feet. In one corner, near the elm, a small bare patch shows where the village children have played at knucklebones during the long summer afternoons, and the earth there is the colour of old chocolate, soft and worn smooth. The elm itself stands at the green's centre, and now that you're closer to it, you can begin to read its great age in the textures of its bark. The trunk is so thick at the base that it forms a kind of low, gentle cliff of furrowed wood, the deep grooves running vertically and twisting slightly as they rise, like the columns of some ancient wooden cathedral. In the deepest grooves near the base, small ferns have rooted themselves, their fronds soft and feathery, and small spiders have made their homes there too, spinning webs of silver thread that catch the last grey light. If you place an imagined palm against the trunk, you may feel the deep, slow pulse of the tree, not as a sound or a movement, but as a kind of presence, the steady, patient being of a creature that has stood here for perhaps 300 years, that watched the cottages rise one by one, that watched the smithy raised when its current smith's grandfather was a boy, that will, with luck, Watch the great-grandchildren of the children playing here today. The bark beneath your palm is cool and rough, and there is a faint dusting of dry lichen upon it. The lichen the colour of old bone, soft and powdery. From the lower branches of the elm hangs the village bell, as you noticed before, but now you may consider it more closely. It is small for a bell, perhaps the size of a child's head, as I said, and it is made of cast bronze rather than the iron the village smith might have been expected to forge. Bells are difficult work, requiring large furnaces and special skills, and this one was bought from a bell founder in the larger town to the south perhaps 50 years ago, and brought here on the back of a patient mule by the men of the village, who then raised it together on a cool morning in late autumn. The bell's surface is the soft greenish-grey colour of weathered bronze, mottled with patches of darker patina where rain and time have worked upon it. Around its waist, a single line of incised lettering encircles it. The words in Latin, simple and unadorned, asking heaven's blessing on those who hear it ring. The clapper inside is a small iron weight on a leather thong, and that thong has been replaced many times across the years, the most recent replacement being the work of the smith's wife, who plats leather thongs of remarkable strength and beauty. The rope that hangs from the clapper thong reaches down nearly to the ground, ending in a small wooden toggle worn smooth by the hands of all who have rung the bell across the decades. The toggle is the size of a hen's egg, and it is the colour of dark honey, polished to a soft sheen by years of handling. Tonight it sways only slightly in the soft breeze that drifts across the green, and the bell above it rests in perfect silence, save for the very faintest ringing that you might imagine you hear, and which is in truth only the wind moving across the bell's open mouth, a sound so soft it is almost a thought. To one side of the elm, a few paces off, stands the village well, and this too deserves your slow attention. The well-head is a low, round structure of cut stone, perhaps 3 feet high, the stones laid in a careful circle and bonded with the same lime mortar used in the smithy walls. The stones have been polished smooth around the rim by countless leanings and graspings of countless hands, and the mortar between them, in the most used places, has worn down a little, leaving the stones standing very slightly proud of one another. Above the well-head, a small wooden roof has been built, supported by 4 stout posts, each post carved at its top into a simple decorative pattern, a kind of soft repeating leaf and vine motif that the village carpenter has been refining across his lifetime. The roof itself is thatched like the cottage roofs, but with reed rather than rye straw, for reed is more resistant to the constant damp that rises from the well mouth, and a soft green-grey moss has crept across its surface in patches. A wooden bucket hangs from a length of plaited rope over the well mouth, and the rope passes over a small wooden wheel set into a crossbeam between 2 of the posts. The bucket is made of oak staves bound with iron hoops, and its outer surface is dark with the years of water, while its inner surface is pale and clean, scrubbed daily by the village goodwives who draw their water here. The rope is the colour of old straw, and it is soft and supple from constant use, the long fibres of it polished smooth in the places where hands grip and lift and grip, in the patient daily rhythm of water drawing. The water itself, though you cannot see it from where you stand, is far below, perhaps 20 feet, perhaps more, and it is cold and clean, drawn from a deep spring that flows from somewhere beneath the eastern hill. The villagers say that the water of this well has cured small fevers and soothed many a child's summer thirst, and that its taste is sweeter than any other water in the surrounding valleys. If you drop a small pebble down the well shaft in your imagination, you might hear, after a long soft pause, the gentle plinking sound of it striking the dark surface of the water below, and then the soft echoing of that sound rising back up the stone shaft, like a small message from the underworld. Beyond the green, the village continues outward in slow, thinning rings. There are perhaps 20 cottages in all, gathered close around the green and its lanes, and beyond them, the small workshops of the various craftsfolk, the carpenter's shop, the tanner's yard set well downwind of the dwellings, the alehouse with its painted wooden sign showing a sheaf of barley, and the little stone building of the parish church at the western edge, its tower no taller than a tall tree, its bell silent in this evening hour. Beyond all of these, the open fields of the village's lands stretch out in long narrow strips, each strip held by a particular family, The strips are ranged in 3 great fields under the open field system that governs the agricultural rhythm of this century. Beyond the fields, the woodland, dark and rustling, where the villagers gather their firewood, their building timber, their nuts and berries and small game. Beyond the woodland, the rolling hills, soft and indistinct in the gathering dark, and beyond the hills only the deep purple sky, scattered now with the first faint stars, soft as grains of salt scattered upon dark velvet, holding the whole quiet world in their gentle, indifferent gaze. Let us imagine, now, that the long night has passed in a single soft heartbeat, and that we have arrived together at the very earliest hour of the morning, that hour before dawn when the sky is the colour of pale slate, and the air holds a damp, cool stillness that smells of dew and of the last embers of 100 banked hearths. The village is not yet awake, but it is no longer quite asleep, and the boundary between those 2 states is one of the most beautiful boundaries in all the world. The first stirring comes, as it always comes, from the smithy. The smith rises before any other in the village, for the forge fire must be coaxed back to life before the first of his neighbours arrives with their morning errands, and the coaxing of a banked fire is a slow and patient art that cannot be hurried. He rises from his bed of straw and woolen blanket without a sound, the way a man rises who has risen at this same hour every morning of his adult life, the way the body learns to wake before the mind does, the way the bones know the time without the need of any outward sign. He dresses quietly in the dim chamber of his cottage, drawing on a long undertunic of unbleached linen, soft and faintly yellow from years of laundering in the village stream. Over this he pulls a heavier outer tunic of coarse brown wool, woven by his wife on the upright loom that stands by the cottage's small window, and belted at the waist with a narrow strip of leather. His hose are of a thicker wool still, the colour of damp earth, and he ties them at the calf with simple linen garters. His shoes are of soft-turned leather, the soles worn thin in places but still sound, the kind of shoes a man owns for many years and replaces only when they have given everything they can give. He steps out of the cottage into the cool grey air, and the door closes softly behind him with the quiet click of an iron latch falling into its keeper. The lane is empty, the cobbles dark with the night's dew, and the only sound is the very faint rustle of his own clothing as he walks. He carries no lantern, for he knows the lane in absolute darkness, knows every turn of it, every uneven stone, every place where the moss grows soft beneath the foot. The way to the smithy is as familiar to him as the way from his bed to his hearth. As he walks, the village stirs in the smallest ways around him. From one cottage, a thin tendril of smoke begins to rise from the smoke louvre, where the goodwife within has just stirred her own banked fire and added a fresh handful of dry kindling. From another, the low clucking of a hen, one of the brown speckled hens that wanders freely in the cottage's small yard, rising from her roost on a low crossbeam. Somewhere, a dog gives a single soft sleepy bark, and is answered by no other dog, and falls silent. The village is breathing, but it is breathing slowly, the long, slow breaths of a creature not yet ready to open its eyes. When the smith reaches the smithy, he pauses for a moment at the doorway, as he always does, and looks once at the eastern sky. There is no colour there yet, only the very faintest paleness, as though someone has rubbed a small soft cloth against the horizon and lifted away a single thin layer of darkness. He nods to himself, satisfied with the weather, for the sky promises a clear day, and a clear day means good work, and good work is what he loves. Inside the smithy the air is warm still, warmer than the air outside, for the great mass of the stone hearth has held its heat through the night, and the banked charcoal at its centre has been smouldering gently, patient and slow. The smith goes first to the bellows, a great pair of leather and wood lungs set beside the hearth, and he checks them with practised hands, feeling for any cracks in the leather, any loose stitching, any small failures of the careful daily maintenance that keeps them in working order. They are sound. They are always sound. He oiled them himself only 3 days ago. He kneels then before the hearth and sweeps aside the thin layer of grey ash that covers the banked coals. Beneath the ash the charcoal glows the deep orange red of a sunset, soft and patient and beautiful, and the small wave of warm air that rises from it touches his face like a kindly hand. He smiles, a small smile that nobody sees. the smile of a man greeting an old friend in the privacy of an empty room. He lays a few small twigs of dry birch upon the coals, and the twigs catch almost at once, their pale bark blackening and curling, small flames of pure yellow leaping up to dance among them. Onto these flames he lays larger pieces of dry oak, and as the oak catches, he begins to work the bellows with a slow, steady, almost ceremonial rhythm, drawing the leather lungs apart, then closing them gently, drawing them apart again. The fire responds, deepening from yellow to orange to a kind of fierce, beautiful red gold, and the air above the hearth begins to shimmer with rising heat. When the fire is well caught, he steps back from the bellows and turns to his bench. There is a piece of work he intends to begin this morning, a long strap hinge for the new doorway of the granary, and he has prepared the stock iron the night before. He takes up the rod of iron, pinches it in the jaws of his long tongs, and lays the end of it into the heart of the fire. He works the bellows again, and the iron, which was cool and grey when it entered the flame, begins after a few moments to take on the deep purple-red colour that means it is heating, and then a brighter red, and then an orange, and then, after long patient minutes, the soft buttery yellow that means it is ready to be worked. He carries it from the fire to the anvil with the slow, measured tread of a man who has carried hot iron 100,000 times in his life, his eyes never leaving the glowing tip. He places it upon the anvil's face, takes up his cross-peen hammer in his right hand, and begins to strike, and the sound of his hammer rings out through the quiet morning air, the first true sound of the village's day, the gentle metallic song that drifts across the green and reaches the cottages and tells the goodwives at their hearths that the smith is at his work, and that all is well, and that the morning has begun. In the cottages around the green, the goodwives rise now in earnest. From each smoke louvre a fresh column of pale blue-grey smoke begins to rise, thicker than before, curling upward into the slowly paling sky. The goodwives take down their iron cooking pots from the hooks above the hearth, fill them with water from the great clay water jar in the corner, and set them to heat upon the iron tripods that stand in every village hearth. Into the heating water they will sift handfuls of oats or of barley meal or of the rougher mixed grains that go into the morning pottage, and they will add a pinch of salt, a sprig of thyme, perhaps a small chunk of dried bacon if the household has such a luxury, and the pottage will simmer slowly while the rest of the household rouses. The children stir last, as children do. They burrow deeper into their woolen blankets. They make small protesting sounds. They pretend, with the limited cunning of the very young, to be still asleep. But the scent of the warming pottage drifts from the hearth and reaches them in their nests of blanket and straw, and one by one they rise, rubbing their eyes, their hair tousled into wild medieval crowns, their small bare feet pattering soft as falling leaves across the swept earthen floor of each cottage. The day has begun. The smith's hammer is ringing. The village is awake. Let us follow, now, one of these soft pillars of wood smoke back down to its source, and step gently, in our imagining, into the cottage from which it rises. The cottage we enter is the one nearest the green, on the eastern side, and it belongs to the family of Aldith, the goodwife of the household, whose hands have tended this hearth for nearly 30 years, since the day she came here as a young bride from a village 2 valleys to the north. The doorway is open this morning, the leather curtain drawn aside and tied back with a length of woven rush, for the air within the cottage grows quickly thick on a cooking morning, and the open doorway allows the older smoke to drift gently out, and the cooler outside air to drift gently in. As you step across the threshold in your imagining, you must duck your head a little, for the lintel is low, no higher than the shoulder of a tall man, and the cottage itself is built to the smaller scale of an earlier time. The interior, after the pale grey of the dawn outside, is at first all shadow and amber. Your imagined eyes adjust slowly, and the shapes of the room begin to reveal themselves. The floor is of beaten earth, swept clean each morning with a besom of birch twigs bound to a hazel handle, and the earth has been polished by the constant passage of feet to a smooth, dark surface that almost gleams in the firelight. In one or two places, scattered handfuls of fresh sweet rush have been laid down, a small luxury, releasing their faint herbal fragrance underfoot. The hearth is at the centre of the room, as it is in every cottage of this kind, a roughly circular space ringed by flat stones set on edge, to contain the fire and protect the floor. Within this ring, the morning's fire burns clean and bright, fed with split logs of seasoned oak and ash, and above it stands the iron tripod from which the great cooking pot is suspended by a long iron pothook, the very pothook, perhaps, made by the smith himself in some long quiet afternoon 5 winters past. The pot is of cast iron, black with the soot of years, its sides curved gently like a vast dark fruit, its mouth wide enough that 2 of Aldith's hands could be laid into it side by side. Within the pot the morning pottage simmers, its surface gently bubbling, releasing a thick, comforting steam that rises straight up toward the smoke louver in the roof and there mingles with the wood smoke before drifting out into the open sky. The scent is round and warm and earthy, the scent of oats and barley and a small handful of dried peas, of salt and thyme, and the faintest whisper of bacon fat, and it is the very scent of a medieval English morning, unchanged across countless generations. Aldith herself moves around the hearth with the unhurried grace of long practice. She is perhaps 50 years old, though she would not know her exact age, for the keeping of years is not an important part of her life. Her hair is pulled back beneath a clean white linen veil, the veil simple and unadorned, tied at the nape of her neck with a narrow strip of the same fabric. Her gown is of brown wool, calf-length, belted at the waist with a long woven girdle of green and yellow threads, and over the gown she wears a sleeveless apron of unbleached linen, tied behind her back with simple bows, and stained here and there with the small honest stains of a working morning, a smear of pottage, a smudge of soot, a small dark spot where she wiped her finger after stirring. Her hands are her most striking feature. They are small but strong, the fingers somewhat thickened at the knuckles from the work of decades, the nails kept short and clean, the palms calloused at their bases from the daily handling of pots and ladles, and the long-handled wooden paddle she uses to stir the pottage. There is on the back of her left hand a small pale scar in the shape of a crescent, where the lip of a hot pot once brushed her 30 years ago, when she was still learning the rhythms of this hearth, and she touches that scar sometimes without realizing it, the way old people touch the small monuments of their own histories. She lifts the wooden paddle now and stirs the pottage with slow, even circles, 3 turns to the left, 3 turns to the right, a rhythm she has used since she was a child watching her own mother at her own hearth. She tastes the pottage with the back of her wooden spoon, the spoon polished by long use to the colour of dark caramel, and she nods to herself satisfied. She adds another small pinch of salt from the carved wooden salt box that sits on the stone shelf beside the hearth, and a thin sprinkle of dried thyme from a small linen pouch, and she stirs again. Around the walls of the cottage, the small possessions of the household are arranged with a careful, modest economy. There is the great oak chest at the foot of the bed, in which the household's linen and woolen clothes are kept, folded with sprigs of dried lavender to keep the moths away. There is the upright loom that stands by the small window, its warp threads taut and ready, a half-finished length of fine grey woolen cloth, slowly growing upon it as Aldith works it in her free hours. There is the spinning wheel, though wheels are still rare in this century, and Aldith more often spins with a hand-held drop spindle, the wooden wall carved with a simple pattern of spirals. On the stone shelf above the hearth sit the small jars and pouches of the household's small stock of seasonings and remedies. There is a jar of honey from the village's own bee skeps, set away in summer and used sparingly through the winter, the honey thick and dark, and the colour of old gold. There is a small linen pouch of peppercorns, more precious than any other thing in the cottage save the family's silver christening cup, traded for in the larger town 3 days' walk to the south, and used only for the most special of feast-day dishes. There are pouches of dried herbs, mint and sage and rosemary, parsley and lovage and thyme, each in its own small pouch, each labelled with a tiny stitched mark recognisable only to Aldith. There are also her remedies, a small pot of a salve made from goose fat, and the crushed leaves of plantain, used for small cuts and burns, a jar of dried elderflowers brewed into a tea for fevers, a bundle of dried yarrow hung from a beam for the staunching of small wounds. Aldith is not the village's wise woman who lives in a cottage of her own at the far edge of the settlement, but every good wife of the village has her own small store of country medicines, passed down from mother to daughter across the long generations. The children of the household are at the table now, a long, low oak table that stands against the wall opposite the hearth. The eldest is a boy of perhaps 12, named Edmund, his hair the colour of straw, his eyes the soft grey of a winter sky. The second is a girl of 9, named Ida, who is the image of her mother in miniature, the same small strong hands, the same careful gaze. The youngest is a boy of 5, named Wat, and he is currently engaged in the serious business of tracing patterns in a small dusting of barley flour that has fallen onto the tabletop, his small finger moving with great concentration. Aldith ladles the pottage from the great pot into wooden bowls, one bowl for each of the children, and sets them on the table, each bowl warm against her palm as she carries it. She gives each child a wooden spoon, their spoons being slightly smaller and lighter than the adults' spoons, carved by the village carpenter on a winter's afternoon some years ago. She places a small loaf of dark rye bread, fresh from her baking yesterday, on a wooden trencher in the centre of the table, and a small wooden cup of fresh milk beside each bowl, the milk drawn this morning from the household's brown cow, who stands placidly in the small lean-to byre at the cottage's end. The children fall to their breakfast with the quiet, focused appetites of the young, and Aldith stands for a moment at the hearth, watching them, the warm orange light of the fire upon her face, the soft amber light of the dawn growing slowly brighter through the small window, and the world outside the cottage waking gently into another day. It happens that today is no ordinary day in the village. It is a market day which falls every second Wednesday across the spring, summer and autumn months, and which gathers the valley folk from miles around into the small green at the village's heart. By the middle of the morning, when the sun has lifted itself well above the eastern hills and turned the dew on the grass into a fine sparkling sheet of soft silver, the green has begun to fill with the soft sounds of arrival. The first of the visiting traders arrives from the south, his cart pulled by a single patient brown ox whose pace is so slow and so steady that the cart seems almost not to move at all, but rather to drift forward, like a small wooden ship upon a sea of grass. The cart is laden with the produce of the lower valleys, with woven baskets of plums the colour of bruised twilight, with small green apples just beginning to turn rosy on one cheek, with bundles of long, soft-leaved herbs, parsley and chervil and the early sprigs of tarragon, each bundle tied with a single strand of thin linen thread. The trader himself walks beside the ox, leading it by a soft rope that loops gently from his hand to the iron ring set in the leather collar around the ox's wide neck. He is a man of middle years, his face weathered to the colour of an autumn leaf, his hair bound back beneath a soft brown cap of felted wool. He walks with the easy, unhurried gait of a man who has walked beside this same ox for 15 years, and who knows every mile of the road between his own village and this one as well as he knows the lines of his own palms. Behind him, in the slow procession that the market day gathers from every direction, comes a goodwife from the western farms, leading 2 small grey donkeys laden with panniers of cheese. The cheeses are wrapped in cloths of unbleached linen, and they are the colour of pale honey, round and firm and fragrant, made from the milk of the goodwife's own goats, and aged for various lengths of time in the cool dim larder of her farmhouse. The eldest of the cheeses, the most precious, is wrapped in 2 cloths instead of 1, and it has a soft blue-green bloom of mould across its rind, the very thing that makes it special and prized among the cheese-loving folk of the larger town. From the north comes a man with a great wooden frame strapped to his back, the frame hung with small clay pots of various sizes, each pot stoppered with a wooden plug and sealed with a daub of beeswax. Within the pots are honey of 3 different shades and flavours: the pale heather honey from the high moors, the darker clover honey from the meadows, the very dark and nearly amber honey that the bees make when they have been working among the late summer flowers of the woodland edge. He walks with a slow, careful step, for the pots are heavy and they clink very softly against one another with each pace, like a small choir of muted earthenware bells. By the time the sun stands a hand's breadth above the eastern hills, the green is alive with the gentle bustle of the market. Trestles have been set up around the perimeter of the green, simple wooden platforms made of split planks laid across crossed pairs of oak supports, and upon these trestles the traders have laid out their wares. The villagers themselves, the goodwives and their husbands and the older children, move slowly from trestle to trestle, examining, considering, sometimes touching a piece of cloth, lifting a wedge of cheese, smelling a sprig of herb, asking the prices in the soft lilting English of this corner of the kingdom. The village smith is at the market too, though he has not closed his forge. His wife and his eldest daughter have set up a small trestle near the elm, and upon it they have arranged the smaller pieces of his work that may interest the visiting folk. There are nails of various sizes, each kind in its own small wooden box. There are small iron hooks for hanging pots above hearths, and slender iron pins for the closing of cloaks at the throat, each pin finished with a small decorative twist that the smith has been refining for years. There are knife blades of the simplest kind, ready for the buyer to fit with their own handle of bone or wood, and there are a few completed knives, with handles of polished horn or smooth-turned beechwood, lying side by side in a neat row upon a strip of soft blue cloth. The smith's wife, whose name is Hilda, is a woman of remarkable composure. She is younger than the smith by perhaps 8 years, and her hair is the dark brown of a chestnut shell, drawn back neatly beneath her white linen veil. She knows the prices of every piece on her trestle without having to think, and she can quote them in 3 different ways depending on whether the buyer wishes to pay in coin, in barter, or in some combination of the two. A buyer might exchange a basket of plums and 2 pence for a knife blade, or 4 small cheeses for a strap hinge, or a length of woolen cloth for a horseshoe and a handful of nails. The economy of the village market is fluid and patient, and Hilda navigates it with the same easy grace that she brings to every other part of her life. Near the trestle, her daughter, who is 15 and named Elfwyn, is engaged in the small business of polishing the smaller iron pieces with a fold of soft sheepskin and a tiny pinch of fine ash, working the surfaces to a soft satin sheen. She is a quiet girl, with the same dark hair as her mother and the same long, calm gaze, and she has been her mother's helper at the market since she was 8 years old. She knows almost as well as her mother the names of every regular visitor to the market, and she greets them with a small smile and a soft word as they pass her trestle. The market itself is a study in slow social rhythm. Folk who see one another only on these market days pause to talk, leaning against the trestles or sitting on the low stone benches that have been set around the elm for this very purpose. They share news of births and weddings and the deaths of old neighbours, news of the sickness that passed through one valley last winter and the rich harvest expected in another this autumn, news of the king's progress through the southern counties, far away and almost mythical in its distance from their own quiet lives. They speak of the weather, of course, for the weather is the underlying music of every conversation in a farming community, and they speak of the small daily concerns of crops and animals and the price of salt. The children, freed for an hour or 2 from their chores, run together in small loose bands around the edges of the green, pausing now and then to watch a trader unpack some particularly interesting thing, or to stand close to a tethered donkey and reach out a small, careful hand to touch its soft grey muzzle. They laugh together in the bright morning air, and their laughter is a high, clear sound that mingles with the deeper sounds of the adults' conversations and the slow, patient breathing of the oxen and donkeys, and the whole of it forms a soft, rich tapestry of sound that drifts up through the branches of the elm and out into the open sky. Above the market the sky has cleared entirely now, and it is the soft, pale blue of a robin's egg, with a few high thin clouds drawn across it in long, patient streaks like brush stalks. The sun, climbing slowly toward its noon height, casts long soft shadows from each trestle, and each villager, and each ancient gnarled trunk, and the shadows move imperceptibly across the cropped grass of the green as the morning unfolds, the slow sundial of the medieval day measuring out its quiet, gracious hours upon the very earth itself. The market begins to thin a little as the sun approaches its highest point, for the visiting traders have many of them sold the larger part of their goods, and are now sitting on the low stone benches by the elm, sharing small loaves of dark bread and rounds of pale cheese, and cups of weak ale brewed by the village alewife, and sold for a halfpenny apiece from a great wooden barrel set up beside her own trestle. The villagers too drift homeward in small, slow groups, bearing their morning's purchases in baskets and bundles, their faces softly content with the small social abundance of the day. The smith has stepped away from his forge for the hour of his noon meal, the only break of any length that he allows himself in his working day, and he sits now upon the wooden bench just outside his smithy doorway, his back resting against the warm sandstone of the wall, his face turned slightly upward toward the sun. He has removed his heavy leather apron, and he wears now only his linen undertunic and his woolen hose, the apron hung on its peg just inside the doorway, the leather still warm from his body and the work of the morning. His wife Hilda has brought him his noon meal from their cottage. Walking the short distance across the green and down the gentle slope of the smithy track, carrying a small wooden trencher in one hand and a stoppered earthenware flask in the other, she has wrapped his portion of bread in a clean linen cloth, and beside the bread she has laid a generous wedge of yellow cheese and 3 small green spring onions from her own garden, and a small pot of soft butter. Butter being a luxury they have begun to enjoy more often since their elder daughter married last year and gave them as a wedding gift a fine wooden butter churn carved by her new husband's father. He thanks her with a small smile and a touch of his thumb to her wrist, the small private gesture of an old marriage, and he begins to eat slowly, breaking the bread with his hands rather than cutting it. The bread is dark and dense, made from a mixture of rye and barley meal, and it has the slightly sour, deeply satisfying flavour that comes from a long slow rising in the warmth of the cottage hearth overnight. The cheese is the cheese of their own household, made by Hilda from the milk of their 3 small goats, and it is the colour of pale butter, with a soft tangy sharpness that complements the dark bread perfectly. The flask he uncorks contains weak ale, the small ale of the household's daily drinking, made from the second running of the brewing barley, and only just strong enough to carry a faint warmth into the chest. He drinks slowly, and the ale is cool from the cold stone larder where Hilda keeps it through the morning, and the small pleasure of cool ale on a warm noontide is one of the small pleasures that he has not, across the long years, ever ceased to appreciate. While he eats, the smithy behind him is silent. The fire still glows within, banked again now to a slow simmer, the bellows resting motionless beside it. The hammers hang on their pegs. The morning strap hinge lies on the bench half completed, its working end coiled into a graceful spiral that he will finish into the loop for the door-pin in the afternoon. The smithy waits patiently for him as it has waited at this hour every day of his working life, its tools ready, its fire warm, its great patient stones holding the heat of the morning's labour and slowly releasing it into the air. Across the village green, the noonday rhythm has settled into itself. From every cottage smoke louvre, the smoke rises a little less thickly than it did in the morning, for the noon meals are simpler than the morning's full pottage, more often a piece of bread and a cup of broth, perhaps a handful of the season's vegetables. The children, who were so lively in the market hour, have grown quiet now, sitting on doorsteps with their small bowls or wooden cups, eating slowly in the dappled shade of the eaves. The geese of the village have gathered in a loose flock at one corner of the green, near the low stone wall that separates the green from the priest's small garden, and they sit there now with their heads tucked beneath their wings or laid along their backs, their feathers white as fresh fallen snow in the noontide sun. Now and then one will lift her head and survey the green with one calm, considering eye, and finding nothing to disturb her, will tuck her head away again and drift back into a soft midday doze. The dogs of the village, of which there are perhaps half a dozen, lie sprawled in the shaded earth beneath the eaves of various cottages, their bellies pressed flat against the cool ground, their soft sides rising and falling with the slow steady breathing of midday rest. They are not the same kind of dogs that you may know from your own time. They are smaller, leaner, with rough coats in shades of fawn and grey and dark brown, the dogs of working country folk, herding dogs and rat-catchers, and the patient companions of long evenings beside the hearth. A cat, the same tabby cat you may have noticed earlier on the cottage doorstep, has climbed now to the top of a low garden wall and lies there in the full sun, stretched out to her fullest length, her amber eyes closed, her tail twitching very softly at its tip in some private feline dream. The wall beneath her is the colour of warm honey, the local sandstone weathered to a soft, friendly hue, and her tabby coat against it makes a study of soft browns and golds that any painter might wish to capture, were there any painters in this small valley to do such capturing. The smith finishes his bread and his cheese and his ale, and he sits for a few more moments in the soft sun, his hands resting easy upon his thighs, his eyes half closed. He is thinking, in the slow drifting way of a man at his noon rest, of nothing very much, of the strap hinge and the curl of the spiral he has yet to finish, of his daughter Aelfwyn and the young man from the next village who has been finding excuses to ride past their cottage of late, of the small ache that has begun to settle in his right shoulder at the end of long days, an ache he has not yet mentioned to Hilda, but which she has noticed all the same, and for which she has been quietly preparing a salve of comfrey root and goose fat. He thinks too of his son who is not in the village today, but who has gone with 2 other young men to the hazel coppice at the edge of the woodland to cut new rods for the village's hurdle fences and for the smith's own smaller stock. The son is 16, on the very edge of being a man, and the smith is teaching him the craft of the forge, slowly, patiently, in the way his own father taught him 40 years ago, and which his grandfather taught his father before that. The trade passes down through the generations like a river finding its old bed, sometimes slowly, sometimes with great ease, but always in the end finding its way. Hilda has gone back to the cottage, and the smith is alone at his bench. He rises slowly, stretching his back with a small soft groan that nobody hears, and he stands for a moment, looking out across the green toward the elm and the well and the cottages beyond. The whole village is at its rest. The whole valley is at its rest. The great pause of the noon hour holds the world, and the world is content to be held. He turns then and steps back into the warm amber air of his smithy, and he takes up his apron from its peg, and he lifts the strap hinge from the bench, and turns it slowly in his hands, considering the next stroke of the next hammer. The afternoon will bring its own slow rhythm of work, and the rhythm will carry him gently through the long bright hours, toward the soft blue evening, and the evening will bring rest, and the rest will bring sleep, and tomorrow the cycle will begin again. As it has begun for him every day for 35 years, the small sweet wheel of his life turning patiently around the warm still axis of the forge, while the smith returns to his hammer and his fire, let us follow another thread of the village's afternoon, and walk together, in our imagining, down the long gentle path that leads from the back of the cottages to the river. The path is narrow, just wide enough for 2 women walking abreast, and it winds between small fenced gardens and through a stand of old hazel where the branches arch overhead and form a soft green tunnel of dappled light. The river itself is not large. It is what an older century would call a brook, a clear, quick stream perhaps 8 paces wide, running over a bed of pale river stones and small smooth pebbles the colour of bread crusts. In the deeper pools the water is the colour of weak tea, stained gently brown by the peat of the higher moorlands from which it draws its sources, and in the shallows it is so clear that you can count every pebble beneath it, every small dart of silver that is a minnow flickering across the gravel. At the place where the path meets the river, a flat shelf of rock projects out over the water, broad enough for 3 or 4 women to kneel side by side, and this is the village washing place, used since long before the memory of any living soul. The rock has been worn smooth by generations of kneeling and beating and rinsing, and its surface is the soft grey of old slate, polished to a faint shine where the women's hands and elbows have rested most often. At the edge of the rock, where it dips toward the water, 2 small notches have been worn into the stone, just the width of a wrist, exactly the right size for a woman to brace her arm as she leans into the water. 3 women are at the washing place this afternoon. The eldest is Edith, the wife of the village miller, a woman of perhaps 60 years, her hair entirely white beneath her veil, her hands marked by a lifetime of washing and kneading, and the small patient labours of a working life. The second is the young wife of the village wheelwright, a woman of perhaps 25 named Mildred, whose first child is sleeping at the bank above her in a small wicker cradle padded with sheepskin. The third is Ida, the 9-year-old daughter of the goodwife Aldith, sent here this afternoon to wash a few small things and to learn the rhythms of the work from the older women. They have brought their washing in baskets of woven willow, and the baskets sit on the bank above them, lined with linen cloth to keep the clean clothes from contact with any earth. The clothes themselves are the everyday garments of the village, under tunics of unbleached linen, woolen hose, the small soft swaddling clouts of the wheelwright's baby, a long woolen apron of Edith's that she has worn at her hearth for the better part of a year, and which is at last in need of a thorough washing. The women kneel at the rock, each at her own position, and the work proceeds in the slow, patient rhythm that is the rhythm of all such work in all such places across the long, quiet centuries. They wet the cloth in the cool stream first, working the water through the fibers with their hands. Then they take a small lump of soft soap from a wooden box that sits between them, the soap pale and fragrant, made by Edith herself from the rendered fat of last autumn's pig and the ash of beechwood, and scented with a few crushed leaves of lavender from her garden. The soap is the colour of old ivory, and it has the faint round sweetness of any honest country soap. They rub the soap into the cloth, then beat the cloth against the rock with a wooden paddle, the kind of long, flat-bladed paddle every household in the village owns for this purpose. The beating is not violent. It is rhythmic, slow, the kind of rhythm that a woman can keep for an hour without growing tired. The paddle rising and falling, with each strike making a soft, clean smacking sound that echoes very gently from the rocks across the stream and is answered, perhaps, by a single thrush calling from somewhere deeper in the hazel wood. After the beating, the rinsing, the women dip the cloth into the cool, flowing water, and the soap and the small loosened soils of daily life are carried away downstream in soft white plumes that drift gently with the current and dissolve at last into the patient body of the river. The women wring the cloth, then twisting it tightly between their hands, and shake it open and consider it, holding it up to the light, looking for any place where the work is not yet done. Where they find such a place, they soap and beat and rinse again, with no impatience, with no haste, with the quiet thoroughness of women who have all of an afternoon to do this work, and who would rather do it once well than twice quickly. Ida, the young girl, is at first awkward at the rhythm. She is too small to use the long paddle effectively, and so Edith has given her a smaller one, scaled to a child's hands, and shows her how to hold it, how to angle her wrist, how to let the weight of the paddle do most of the work rather than her own thin arm. Ida is a careful child, and she watches the older women with grave attention, copying their motions, asking small, soft questions when she is uncertain. "Mistress Edith," she says, her voice clear in the soft afternoon air, "must I always beat upon the cloth, or only when the cloth is dirty?" Edith laughs, a small warm laugh that comes from somewhere deep inside her chest. "Always beat, child," she says. The beating loosens the soils that the water cannot reach by itself. If you only soak and rinse, you will have wet cloth, but you will not have clean cloth. The beating is the heart of the washing. Ida nods solemnly, taking this lesson into her small, careful mind, and she returns to her work with redoubled attention. The wheelwright's wife smiles at the older woman, a small private smile, and the older woman smiles back, the two of them sharing the unspoken acknowledgement that this is how the work passes down across the generations. This is how a girl child becomes a woman. This is how the long old knowledge of the daily life is kept alive, in small streamside conversations on warm afternoons, year after year, mother after mother, daughter after daughter, in an unbroken thread that stretches back into the deep mists of time and forward, with luck, into times still to come. While they work, the conversation drifts among them in the slow, easy way of conversation among women who are doing a familiar task with their hands. They speak of the market day, of the trader from the south who had such fine plums, of the cheese they bought and of the price they paid for it. They speak of the wheelwright's baby who is perhaps coming to the age of his first proper teeth, and they share their grandmother's remedies for the pain of teething, the rubbing of the gums with a small clean piece of the root of marshmallow, the wearing of a small bag of dried chamomile against the child's chest at night. They speak of the priest's new garden, which he is planning to plant with herbs for the chapel's altar cloths, and of the wheelwright's eldest brother who has gone to the larger town to trade for a new iron rim for a wagon, and of the small troubles in the household of the carpenter, whose elderly mother has been ill these past weeks, but who, by all accounts, is mending well now. The river flows past them, cool and patient, and the soft wet cloths slap against the rock, and the basket of washed clothes at the bank beside them grows slowly fuller as the afternoon unwinds. The wheelwright's baby wakes once, gives a small hungry cry, and is taken up by his mother and nursed quietly under a fold of her cloak while she continues with one hand to talk softly with the others. When the baby has finished, he is laid back in his cradle, full and content, and falls almost at once into the deep soft sleep of well-fed infancy. Above them, the sky is still that soft pale blue of mid-afternoon, and the sun has begun almost imperceptibly to slant its light a little more from the west, casting the shadows of the hazel branches in long soft stripes across the bank and the rock and the slow brown water. Somewhere upstream, a kingfisher gives its single sharp call and is gone, a flash of sapphire and copper across the surface of a pool, almost too quick for the eye to follow. The day moves on, the cloths grow clean, the women work and rest, and work again, and the river carries away the small soils of life and leaves only the soft, sweet, patient cleanness behind. Let us walk now, in our imagining, back along the hazel path toward the village, but let us turn before we reach the cottages, and step instead through a small wooden gate set into a low hedge of hawthorn and dogrose. Beyond the gate lies a garden, the household garden of the smith and his family, perhaps 30 paces long and 20 paces wide, and it is one of the small private wonders of the village. The garden is laid out in the manner of all such gardens of this century, in long narrow beds separated by paths of beaten earth, each path just wide enough for the goodwife's feet to walk along without trampling the plants on either side. The beds are raised slightly above the level of the paths, edged with split planks of oak that have weathered to the soft silver grey of old driftwood, and the soil within them is dark and rich, deepened across the years by patient additions of stable straw, kitchen ash, and the long rotted leaves that the household gathers from the woodland edge each autumn. In the bed nearest the gate grow the leeks, perhaps 30 of them in 2 long rows, their blue-green leaves arching gracefully upward and outward like the curving fingers of small green hands. They are the colour of the sky at twilight, almost grey-blue at their tips and a darker green nearer the soil, and they have been grown from seed by the goodwife since the early spring. She will harvest them through the autumn and the winter, drawing them one by one from the soft black soil to make her potages and her broths. Beyond the leeks, a bed of cabbages, the great round heads of them swelling now toward their full size. The leaves are a deep blue-green with soft purple veins, and the outer leaves curl outward and away from the central head in elaborate ruffled forms, as though each cabbage were a vast peculiar flower opening itself slowly to the world. They are heavy, and when the goodwife walks past them, she sometimes pauses and lifts one with her hand, hefting it gently, judging by its weight whether it is ready for the cooking pot or whether it should be left another week to grow. Beyond the cabbages, a bed of onions, smaller than the leeks but more numerous, perhaps 100 of them in close rows, their slender green tops standing upright like a tiny green forest. The onions are the smith's particular love, for he eats them raw with his bread at the noontime meal, sliced thin upon a wooden trencher, and he says that no day is complete without an onion. The goodwife grows them from the small bulbs called sets that she has saved from last year's crop, and she plants them each year on the same day in the early spring, the day after the feast of St. Gregory, as her own mother taught her to do. Further along, beyond a small, sturdy, upright structure of woven hazel, climb the peas. They are still in flower this afternoon, the small white and purple flowers nodding gently at the tips of the trailing tendrils, and the first small pods are just beginning to form, no longer than a fingernail, soft green and tender. The peas will be ready in some weeks yet, and when they are, the goodwife will gather them into a wicker basket and shell them at her hearth in the evening, the empty pods piling up in her lap, the small green pearls of the peas falling into a wooden bowl with a soft, clean sound that is one of the small sweet sounds of summer. There is a bed of herbs near the centre of the garden, and this bed is the goodwife's private joy. There is sage with leaves the colour of sea mist, soft and slightly furred to the touch. There is thyme, low and creeping, its tiny dark leaves releasing their warm round fragrance at the slightest brush. There is rosemary, taller than the other herbs, its needle-like leaves dark green above and silver beneath, scenting the air around it with that resinous, almost piney perfume that is the very smell of a sun-warmed Mediterranean hillside, though the goodwife herself has never seen the sea. There is parsley in its broad-leaved variety, the leaves are glossy bright green like polished emeralds, and there is mint, growing rampant in one corner where it has been allowed its head, sprawling across the path edges and threatening the bed of chamomile beyond. The chamomile bed, at the far end of the herb garden, is a small soft cloud of low feathery foliage. dotted with the white and yellow daisies of the chamomile flowers themselves. When the good wife walks among them, the feathery leaves brush against her ankles and release the delicate apple scent of chamomile into the warm afternoon air. And the very smell of it is a kind of medicine, a quiet calming of the nerves and the breathing, an old slow gift from the garden to the woman who tends it. At the far end of the garden, beyond the herb bed, stands the great wonder of the place. It is a small wooden hut on tall legs, perhaps 4 feet off the ground, sheltered by a thatched roof and walled on 3 sides with woven hazel. The 4th side is open. Within the hut sit 4 straw bee-skeps, each one shaped like an inverted basket, woven from long ropes of straw coiled in spirals and bound together with thin strips of split bramble. The skeps are the colour of old gold, and each one has a small entrance hole cut at its base, just wide enough for a single bee to enter or leave. This afternoon the bees are busy. They come and go from the entrance holes in a constant slow stream, the air about the hut alive with their low patient humming, a sound so deep and so steady that it seems almost to be the sound of the warm summer afternoon itself, made audible. The bees themselves are small and brown and gold, their bodies covered with a soft fine fur, and they move with the unhurried purpose of creatures who know exactly what they are about. Some are returning from the meadows beyond the village with their hind legs heavy with pollen, the pollen baskets coloured bright yellow or pale orange, or sometimes a deep dusky red, depending on which flowers they have visited. The smith's eldest daughter Aelfwyn is in the garden this afternoon, kneeling at the herb bed with a small wooden trug beside her, gathering sprigs of thyme and rosemary for the evening's cooking. She works quietly, her dark hair falling forward across her cheek, her fingers moving with the careful deliberation that her mother has taught her, choosing only the freshest tips of each plant, leaving the older woody growth to continue its life. She knows the bees well, and they know her, and as she works the air around her is filled with their soft humming as they pass and repass on their unhurried errands. Once or twice a bee lands upon her hand or her wrist, walking across her skin for a moment with the delicate ticklish pressure of its tiny feet, and she pauses in her work and watches it with a quiet smile, until the bee, having satisfied whatever curiosity drew it to her, lifts itself away and resumes its journey to the next flower. The bees do not sting her. They have not stung any member of the household in years, for the household has learned to move slowly and patiently among them, and the bees in turn have come to recognize the slow patience of the family as something that means them no harm. The smith's wife will harvest the honey in the late summer, and the harvesting is itself a small ceremony of the year. She and her husband will rise early on a still cool morning, when the bees are sluggish from the night's chill, and they will smoke each skep gently with a small bundle of smouldering puffballs, the smoke drifting through the woven straw and quietening the bees within. Then she will lift each skep and slice away a portion of the honeycomb, leaving always enough for the bees to feed upon through the long winter, taking only the surplus that the small generous creatures have made above their own needs. The honey itself, when it is pressed from the comb, will be the deep gold of late summer light, thick and slow-flowing, scented with the small sweet ghosts of every flower the bees have visited across the long bright weeks of their working year. Some of it will be sealed into clay pots and stored in the cool dim larder for the household's own use across the coming year. Some will be traded at the market for things the household lacks, and some, the very best of it, will be saved for the high feast days of the church, for the celebration of midsummer and the harvest home and the long holy days of Christmas, when the whole village gathers in the candlelit warmth of the parish church and speaks together the old beautiful prayers in the slow patient Latin that the priest has taught them, generation after gentle generation. The afternoon has turned, almost without you noticing, into the early evening. The sun has dropped below the western trees, and the sky above the village is the soft pink-gold colour of a ripe peach, fading at its edges into the pale lavender that means dusk is coming. The smith has finished his day's work, banked his fire for the night, hung his tools upon their pegs, and walked home to his cottage. The goodwives have brought in their drying linens from the hawthorn hedges where they were laid out after the washing, and folded them with deft, practised hands. The children have been called in from their games, their faces washed at the small pewter basins by every cottage door. It is the hour of the evening meal, but it is also, for those who wish, the hour of the alehouse, and on a market evening the alehouse is the warm, bright heart of the village. It stands at the eastern edge of the green, a low building with whitewashed walls and a thatched roof that hangs especially deep over the doorway, providing shelter for those who linger outside on warm evenings. Above the door hangs the painted wooden sign showing the sheaf of barley, the ancient symbol of every alehouse in every village across the kingdom, and the sign creaks very softly on its iron hooks in the soft evening breeze. The alehouse is kept by Wilfrida, a widow of perhaps 55, whose late husband built the place with his own hands in their early years of marriage. She has run it alone since his passing 7 years ago, and she runs it well, for she brews a fine ale and keeps a clean hearth and welcomes all the village folk with the same warm patience, whether they come for a single cup of the small beer or for a long evening of conversation by the fire. As you step, in your imagining, through the doorway, the world inside opens itself to you in soft layers of warm light and warmer scent. The room is low and wide, perhaps 12 paces across and 20 paces deep, with a beamed ceiling so low that a tall man must duck slightly as he moves. The beams themselves are dark with the smoke of decades, and from them hang bundles of dried herbs, mint and thyme and bay, and small clusters of dried hops, and a great wheel of yellow cheese in a net bag, slowly aging in the smoky air. The hearth is at the centre of the room, larger than the hearth of any cottage, ringed by a low stone wall and crossed by an iron crane upon which hang a great copper kettle and 2 smaller iron pots. The fire within burns slowly with thick logs of seasoned oak, and the flames cast a warm rosy light across the faces of the dozen or so villagers who have gathered upon the wooden benches around the room. The benches are simple, hewn from solid oak, polished by countless years of sitting to a soft satin sheen at their tops. They are arranged around long oak tables, also hewn solid, also polished by the elbows and the cups of generations. Upon the tables stand the wooden cups and the great pewter pitchers of the evening's drinking, and the small wooden trenchers upon which Wilfrida serves the simple foods of the alehouse, the dark bread and the yellow cheese, and the small bowls of pickled onions she puts up each autumn from her own small garden. The smith is here this evening, for the market day always brings him to the alehouse for an hour or so after his evening meal at home. He sits at one of the long tables with 3 other men, the carpenter, the wheelwright, and the man who cares for the village's small flock of sheep. They are old companions, all of them having grown up together in this village or in villages within an afternoon's walk, and they share the slow, easy fellowship of men who have known one another for 40 years and more. They are speaking, when you enter, of the autumn ploughing, which will begin in some weeks, and of the new yoke of oxen that the carpenter has been training for the village's use. The carpenter is describing the patience required to teach a young ox to walk straight in the furrow, and he is laughing softly as he tells the story of a particular young ox 2 seasons past, who would not be persuaded to walk in any direction except sideways, and who eventually had to be retired from the plough team and given over to the simpler work of pulling the cart on market days. The smith laughs with him, a slow, deep laugh that comes from somewhere in his chest, and he raises his cup of ale and takes a slow draught before setting it down again. The ale is dark and full-bodied, brewed by Wilfrida from the best of last year's barley malt, and it has been aged in oak casks in the cool back room of the alehouse for several months, and it carries the round, soft sweetness of good barley, and the gentle, bitter edge of the wild hops that Wilfrida gathers each summer from the hedgerows beyond the village. In another corner of the room, a small group has gathered around a young man with a small wooden harp in his lap. The harp is no larger than a child's pillow, with 8 strings of twisted gut, and the young man plays it with a soft, careful touch. He is the son of the wheelwright, perhaps 20 years old, and he has been learning the harp these past 5 years from a wandering minstrel who passed through the village one autumn and stayed for the winter, sleeping in the barn of the wheelwright in exchange for music lessons given to anyone who wished to learn. The young man plays now a slow, soft tune, an old air of the country, the kind of tune that has no proper title but is known to every musician for many counties around as simply the slow air or the evening tune. The melody curls upward in long, gentle phrases and curls down again, and in the spaces between his harp notes, an older woman beside him begins to sing softly, almost under her breath. the words of an old song about a young woman who waits for her sweetheart to return from the harvest. A song so old that nobody knows who first sang it, a song that has passed from mother to daughter and from grandmother to granddaughter for more generations than anyone can count. The other villagers fall quiet around the singer. They do not silence themselves entirely, for they continue their conversations in soft murmurs at the other tables, but they lower their voices, allowing the song to drift through the room as the dominant thread of the evening's music. The song is in the soft Middle English of the country, and its words are gentle and old, full of the small homely images of harvest and field and the slow returning of the year. As the singer sings, the smith watches her with a small warm smile on his face. He has known her since they were children, and he knows that she sings this song every market evening, and that her own husband, dead now these 15 years, was a man who loved this song above all others. The singing of it is, for her, a small private remembrance, a way of keeping her husband's memory alive in the fabric of the village's evenings, and the villagers who listen with her know this. And they listen with the quiet respect of folk who understand that not every act of remembrance need be spoken aloud. When the song ends, there is a small silence, the kind of silence that follows a beautiful piece of music, and then the wheelwright lifts his cup and says simply, "A fine song, Aldjith, as ever," and the singer smiles, a small grateful smile, and bows her head, and the conversation begins to lift again around the room, gentle as a slowly rising tide. Wilfrida moves among the tables, a great pewter pitcher in her hand, refilling the cups of those who wish for more, smiling and exchanging soft words with each of her customers. She knows them all. She knows what each of them prefers, and she knows when to pour and when to leave the cup as it is, and she knows the small private signals by which a man indicates that he is ready for his last drink of the evening before he walks home to his cottage and his bed. The fire in the hearth has burnt lower as the evening has progressed, but a fresh log is laid upon it now by Wilfrida's young helper, a girl of 14 who is the daughter of one of the village's poorer families, and who has been taken into the alehouse as an apprentice in the brewing trade. The new log catches slowly, sending up small cheerful flames of yellow and orange, and the warmth of the renewed fire reaches out across the room and touches the faces of all who sit before it, casting soft rosy shadows that flicker gently against the dark beams and the white walls, and the kind quiet faces of all who have gathered here at the warm bright heart of the village on this slow soft evening of the medieval year. Let us step away now, gently, from the warm light of the alehouse, and stand for a long quiet moment in the cool darkening air of the green. The stars are coming out one by one above the village, the brightest of them already visible just above the eastern hills, the others emerging slowly from the deepening blue of the sky, like small pale flowers opening themselves to the night. Let us think, here in this quiet place, about the strange and beautiful philosophy that governs the lives of the villagers we have been visiting. It is a philosophy that they themselves would not call a philosophy, for they would have no word for such a thing, and would think the very idea strange if it were proposed to them. They live by it rather than thinking about it, and yet it shapes every hour of their days, every gesture of their hands, every small choice they make in the slow unfolding of their lives. It is the philosophy of slow hands, of patient making, of the long, deep relationship between a human being and the work of that human being's body. Consider the smith whose hammer you heard ringing across the morning air. The horseshoe he made today is not the work of a single hour, even though the actual hammering took perhaps that long. It is the work of his whole life, and of the lives of the smiths who taught him, and of the smiths who taught those smiths. Every motion of his hands carries within it the accumulated wisdom of generations, the small adjustments and refinements that have been passed down across centuries, the precise angles and rhythms that produce a horseshoe that fits a horse's hoof comfortably and lasts for many months of hard road work. When he heats the iron, he does not measure the temperature with any instrument. There were no thermometers in his world, no pyrometers, no scientific instruments of any kind. He measures the temperature with his eyes, by the color of the glowing metal, the deep purple red that means too cold to work, the cherry red that means almost ready, the bright orange that means perfect for forging, the soft yellow that means hot enough for welding, the white hot brilliance that means almost too hot, dangerous, beginning to burn. He learned these colours from his father, who learned them from his own father, and he learned them slowly, across years of standing beside the forge as a child, watching, until the colours became as familiar to him as the colours of his own family's faces. When he strikes the iron with his hammer, he does not measure the force of his blows with any instrument either. He measures it with his arm, with the long-trained wisdom of his shoulder and his elbow and his wrist, with the deep proprioceptive knowledge of his own body that has been refined across 40 years of daily practice. He knows without thinking exactly how hard to strike, exactly where to strike, exactly how to angle the hammer so that the blow falls true, and the iron deforms in precisely the way he wishes it to deform. This is not magic, although it might seem so to a modern observer. It is something simpler and deeper than magic. It is the gift of long, slow, patient work, the gift that any human body can develop, given enough years and enough humility, the gift that has been the inheritance of craftsmen since the first man or woman shaped the first pot from the first lump of clay, perhaps 15,000 years ago, in some warm place near a slow river under an indifferent sky. Consider, too, the good wife at her hearth, stirring her morning pottage. She does not measure her ingredients with cups or scales or spoons of standardized size. She measures them with her eyes and her hands, with the long-trained sense of proportion that her mother taught her, and her grandmother before her. A pinch of salt is a true pinch, the amount that her thumb and forefinger can lift in their natural grip. A handful of oats is a true handful, the amount that her palm can hold, neither overflowing nor underfilled. A sprig of thyme is a true sprig, the length that her fingers naturally break from the stem. When the pottage is ready, she does not check it against any timer. She knows it is ready by the way the bubbles rise, by the way the steam smells, by the slight resistance she feels when she stirs it with her wooden paddle, by the colour of the surface, by 100 small signs that she has learned to read across the long, quiet years of her life. The pottage will be the same pottage that her mother made, and that her mother made, and that woman before her, in a chain of patient making that stretches back into the deep mist of human time. This is the philosophy of slow hands. It is the conviction, unstated but absolute, that the human body, given time and practice and the patient teaching of those who came before, is the finest instrument ever made for the doing of any work that needs to be done. It does not require external measurement because it has internalized measurement. It does not require external timing because it has internalized timing. It is its own laboratory and its own workshop and its own library, all at once. It is a philosophy that produces, almost without trying, things of extraordinary beauty. The horseshoe that the smith made today is beautiful, although he himself would not call it beautiful. The pottage that the goodwife made this morning was beautiful, although she would have looked at you in puzzlement if you had told her so. The woven hazel fence that runs along the smithy track is beautiful. The thatched roof of the cottage at the green's edge is beautiful. The patterns of the cobblestones in the lane, the curve of the elm's lower branches, the soft fold of the linen veil upon the goodwife's hair, the particular angle at which the leather curtain has been hung in the smithy doorway, all these things are beautiful, with the deep, slow beauty that comes only from the long marriage of the human hand and the natural material across many patient generations. And there is in this philosophy a kind of dignity that has grown rare in the long centuries since. Every villager in this small place has work that they can do well, work that they have been taught with care, work that produces a thing of value that other people will use and depend upon. The smith makes horseshoes, and the carpenter makes wagons, and the wheelwright makes wheels, and the goodwife makes pottage, and the miller grinds grain, and the brewer brews ale, and the priest tends the chapel, and the swineherd watches the pigs, and the shepherd watches the sheep, and the spinner spins wool, and the weaver weaves cloth. Each of these labours is necessary, and each is honoured, and each is part of the slow, patient fabric of village life. There is, of course, hardship here. The villagers work long hours, and the work is physical, and the winters are cold, and the harvests are uncertain, and the small accidents of life take their toll across the slow years. The medieval world was not a paradise, and it would be foolish to imagine it as one. There was hunger, and there was illness, and there was the long, slow grief of losing children to the small fevers of the season, and the long, slow labour of carrying grown bodies through the soft earth of a country churchyard. But there is also in this place a kind of completeness. Each person knows their place in the world, and their place is connected by 1,000 soft threads to the places of every other person in the village, and to the places of the people in the next village, and to the slow, wide turning of the seasons upon the patient earth. There is no advertisement here, no constant pressure to be more than one is, no manufactured discontent. There is only the work of the day, and the bread of the evening, and the company of the kind familiar faces around the hearth, and the long slow night, and the morning that will follow, and the year that will turn, and the years that will turn after that, in a slow patient wheel of life that has its own quiet wisdom, and its own quiet beauty, and its own quiet abiding peace. Stand for a moment longer in the cool blue dark of the evening green, and let us think now about another of the slow truths that govern this place, the truth about time itself, which is so different here from the time you may know in your own age that it might almost be called a different thing entirely, sharing only its name with the brisk hurried thing that you call by the same word. Time in this village is not measured by clocks. There are no clocks here. There are no clocks anywhere in this country except in a few of the great monastic houses to the south, where the hours of the divine offices are sounded by water clocks of remarkable but still very imprecise design. In the village itself, time is told by the sun, and by the bell of the parish church, which is rung by the priest at the morning, the noon, and the evening hours, and by the long, slow turning of the sky in the seasons. A villager rises with the dawn and goes to bed not long after the dusk. The day is divided not into hours of 60 minutes each, but into broad, soft phases of work and rest, the early morning and the mid-morning, the noon and the early afternoon, the late afternoon and the dusk and the early night. Within each of these phases, the work proceeds at the pace that the work itself requires, neither hurried nor delayed, finding its own natural rhythm in the slow conversation between the worker and the materials. The seasons, however, are far more strictly observed than the hours, for the seasons govern the agricultural year, and the agricultural year is the deep underlying clock of the village's life. There is the time of the early ploughing in late winter, when the soil is just thawed enough to be turned by the heavy share. There is the time of the spring sowing, when the seeds are scattered into the freshly turned earth. There is the time of the early growth, when the green shoots appear and must be tended against the predations of birds and small mammals. There is the time of the high summer, when the grain stands tall and golden in the fields and the long hot work of the harvest begins. There is the time of the late harvest, when the last of the apples are gathered and the orchards are turned over to the foraging pigs. There is the time of the autumn ploughing, when the stubble is turned under and the earth prepared for the next year's crop. There is the time of the winter quiet, when the work moves indoors to the loom and the spindle and the small craft work of the long candlelit evenings. Each of these seasons brings its own foods, its own colours, its own scents, its own sounds. The villagers know them all without ever having had to learn them in any conscious way. They have absorbed them as a child absorbs a language, by simply living within them year after slow year, until the rhythms of the year have become as much a part of the villagers' bodies as the rhythms of their own breathing. There are also the saints' days and the feast days of the church, which mark out the year in another way, in a more sacred and ceremonial way, providing the deep pattern upon which the simpler agricultural pattern is laid. There is Christmas, the great winter feast of the birth of Christ, when the church is hung with greenery, and the alehouse is full of laughter, and the long slow nights are softened by the bright candle flames of the Christmas Eve service. There is Easter, the great spring feast of the resurrection, when the church bells ring at midnight to announce the rising of the Lord, and the village walks together in the cool dark to attend the long beautiful liturgy of the Paschal Vigil. There is Midsummer, the great feast of John the Baptist, when bonfires are lit on the high hills and the villagers dance in their courting pairs around the leaping flames. There is Lammas, the early August feast of the first loaves, when the first of the new wheat is brought to the church to be blessed and made into the bread of the Eucharist. There is Michaelmas, the late September feast of the Archangel, which marks the end of the harvest year and the beginning of the new agricultural reckoning. Between these great feasts are scattered the lesser saints' days, of which there are perhaps 100 across the year, each of them remembered with greater or lesser solemnity, depending on the local importance of the saint. The villagers know which saints are particular to their own parish, Which saints are invoked for particular illnesses or particular kinds of trouble? Which saints are remembered with bonfires and which with simple prayers? Which saints belong to the deep, old soil of the country and which were brought here by the missionaries of many centuries past? So time for the villagers is not a thin line stretching from past to future, with each hour of the day equal to every other hour. It is a great wheel slowly turning with deep soft hollows and high bright peaks, with periods of great labour and periods of deep rest, with sacred moments and ordinary moments, with the long deep memory of the saints and the seasons stretching back into the unimaginable past, and the patient confidence that the wheel will turn again in the same slow way, for the children of their children's children, far beyond their own quiet lives. There is, in this view of time, a deep consolation. The villager who watches her son grow up and leave for the larger town, who watches her husband's hair turn from brown to grey to white across the slow decades, who watches her own face change in the small polished disc of brass that hangs by her hearth as her household's only mirror. This villager does not feel that time is running out, that there is some final deadline beyond which all will be lost. She feels rather that she is part of a great slow turning, that her own life is a single small year within a much greater year, and that the year itself will continue, with or without her, in its slow gentle revolution around the patient son. She knows that she will die, and she does not pretend otherwise, for death is a familiar visitor in her village, taking the very young and the very old, and sometimes the middle-aged in the strange unpredictable way of medieval death. She has buried 2 of her own children, one in infancy and one in early childhood, and she has buried her own mother and her own father, and several of her aunts and uncles. The churchyard at the western edge of the village is well known to her, and she walks past it almost every day on her way to and from the parish church. But she does not fear death, not in the way that the modern world has come to fear it. She has been taught from her earliest childhood that death is the doorway to another life, a longer life, a more beautiful life, in which the small struggles of this world will be set aside and only the deep good things of love and of God will remain. She does not fully understand this teaching, for it is mysterious, but she trusts it, in the way that she trusts the priest who taught it to her, and the saints whose stories she has heard since infancy, and the slow turning of the seasons themselves, which proves to her every spring that life rises again from the apparent death of winter, and that no ending is ever truly an ending. So when she stands by the bedside of an ailing neighbour, holding the neighbour's thin hand in her own thicker one, speaking the soft prayers of the country, she does not feel the kind of crushing despair that the modern world has come to associate with such moments. She feels grief, certainly, and tenderness, and the quiet awe of being present at a great threshold. But she feels also a deep, slow peace, the peace that comes from knowing that this moment, however hard, is part of a larger pattern, that the larger pattern is good, that the going of one soul is not the end of the world, but only one small turning of the great wheel. This is the weight of years in the medieval village, and it is a weight that is borne lightly, because it is borne together, and because it is borne within the slow, comforting arms of a tradition that stretches back farther than any individual memory, and forward farther than any individual life. To live within such a tradition is to be held, at every moment, by 1,000 soft hands, the hands of the ancestors and the hands of the saints and the hands of the unborn descendants, all of them, in some quiet sense, present in the slow dim light of the village's long evenings. Let us think, now, about the strange particular kind of beauty that fills this village, a beauty that is unlike the more deliberate and self-conscious beauty of later ages. This is beauty that was not, in any conscious sense, intended. It is beauty that emerged almost as a byproduct from the patient, honest making of useful things over long stretches of slow time, and it is in some ways the deepest and most lasting kind of beauty there is. Consider the iron strap hinge that the smith has been making this morning. He did not set out to make a beautiful object. He set out to make a hinge, a long flat strip of iron, drawn out from a thicker bar, tapered toward its ends, with a loop at one end to fit over the door pin and a series of holes for the nails that will fix the other end to the door. The function of the hinge is to allow the door to swing freely on its pin, to bear the weight of the heavy oak planks, to hold firm through long years of use against the small pressures of wind and weather, and the daily passage of human bodies through the doorway. But because the smith is a master of his craft, because he has been making such hinges for 35 years, because his hands have learned the precise angles and rhythms that produce the best work, the hinge has become beautiful. The taper from the loop to the body is graceful, a long, slow narrowing that the eye reads as elegant proportion. The loop itself is perfectly round, hammered true on the horn of the anvil, and it catches the light along its inner curve in a way that is somehow satisfying to look at. The surface of the iron, hammered and reheated and hammered again across its length, has acquired a soft pebbled texture that is called by the smiths the hammer scale, and this texture catches the light unevenly across the length of the piece, producing a soft shimmer of dark grey and silver and faint blue that no factory-made hinge could ever match. The smith did not aim for any of these qualities. He aimed only to make a sound hinge that would last for 100 years on the granary door. But because he aimed so faithfully and so well, beauty has slipped in almost unnoticed and has settled into the work like a quiet guest who arrived without knocking. This is the secret of the beauty of the medieval village. Almost everything in it has been made this way. The cobblestones in the lane were laid by men who were trying simply to make a road that would not turn to mud in the autumn rains. The thatched roofs were thatched by men who were trying simply to keep the rain out of the houses. The cob walls were daubed by women and men who were trying simply to make warm, dry rooms in which to live their lives. The wooden cups on the alehouse tables were turned by a wood turner who was trying simply to make cups that would hold ale and not leak. But because all of these makers were working with natural materials by hand, with tools that were themselves made by hand, with techniques that had been refined across centuries of careful trial and error, the things they made acquired qualities that we might call beautiful, even though no individual maker ever set out specifically to make them so. The cobblestones acquired their soft, dark gleam. The thatched roofs acquired their layered, feathered texture. The cob walls acquired their gentle modulation of colour where the limewash had thinned with weather. The wooden cups acquired the warm, honeyed surface that comes only from years of being held in human hands. Even the small daily objects of the village partake of this beauty. The wooden trencher upon which the goodwife serves her pottage is beautiful, with its smooth worn rim where her fingers have grasped it 10,000 times. The iron pot-hook is beautiful, with its graceful long curve and the small twist near its tip where the smith made his decorative flourish. The leather curtain at the smithy doorway is beautiful, with the deep mahogany colour it has acquired across years of rain and sun, and the soft drape it has settled into where it hangs from its bar. The clothing of the villagers is beautiful too, though they themselves would be astonished to hear it called so. Their woolen tunics, woven on simple upright looms by the women of their own households, have a subtlety of colour and texture that no machine-woven cloth has ever quite captured. The dyes are made from plants gathered in the woodland and the meadows, the soft yellow of weld, the deep blue of woad, the warm red of madder, the brown-green of walnut hulls, and the colours have a particular living quality, a slight unevenness from one part of the cloth to another, that the eye reads as warmth and authenticity rather than as defect. The very faces of the villagers are beautiful, in the strange way that the faces of all working people have always been beautiful when looked at with the right kind of attention. The smith's face is weathered from 40 years of standing close to the forge, his cheeks a little reddened, his nose strong and slightly bent, his eyes the deep blue-grey of a winter sea. His wife's face is softer but no less marked by her life. The small lines around her eyes from the long hours of close work at the loom, the gentle hollow at the base of her throat, where she has carried her many children in their infancy, the warm hands with the small scar on the back of one of them. These faces have not been crafted by any beauty industry. There were no cosmetics here, no surgical adjustments, no images of impossible perfection circulated through any medium to make the villagers feel that their natural faces were inadequate. They are simply the faces that life has made, across the long, slow accumulation of work and weather and joy and grief, and in their unself-conscious authenticity they have a beauty that more deliberately fashioned faces have never quite been able to achieve. Even the village's small imperfections are beautiful. The cottage that leans very slightly to one side, where the foundation has settled across 2 centuries, is beautiful in its leaning. The path that curves around a particular old oak tree, simply because the tree was there when the path was first walked and nobody has ever thought to cut it down, is beautiful in its curve. The well bucket that is slightly chipped on one side where it knocked against the stone wall some years ago is beautiful in its chip. The small uneven places, the slight asymmetries, the soft accumulations of wear, all of these things speak of a long history of use and care, and the eye, when it has learned to see them, finds them deeply moving in a way that perfection rarely is. There is a word for this kind of beauty in some languages, though there is no precise word for it in English. The Japanese have a word, wabi-sabi, that comes close to it, the beauty of the imperfect, the impermanent, the incomplete. The medieval village embodies this beauty without ever having a word for it, simply by being what it is, simply by going about its slow, patient business of living and making and using and wearing things out and starting again. And there is in this beauty a profound consolation for the human spirit. To live among such beauty is to feel, at every moment, that the world is friendly to one's existence, that the materials of one's life are themselves worthy of love and care, that the work of one's hands matters and will continue to matter long after the hands themselves are dust. The smith does not know that the strap hinge he is making today will still hang on the granary door 300 years from now, that it will outlast him by 12 generations, that it will be examined with reverent attention by men of a far future age, who will marvel at the quiet excellence of his work. He does not know this, and it would seem strange to him if he were told, but it is true, and it is part of the deep meaning of his life, although he could not articulate it if you asked him. And we, looking back at his village across 900 patient years, are perhaps in a position to see it more clearly than he could see it himself. We can see the way the whole place is one great slow accumulation of careful making, layer upon layer, generation upon generation, and we can feel, even at this great distance, the soft warm weight of all that patient honest work settling upon our hearts like a small soft blanket, comforting and ancient and kind. The night has deepened around the village now, and the soft pink gold of the early evening sky has given way to the deep velvet blue of true night. The first stars have multiplied into a great drift of small bright points across the dark, and the rising moon, waxing toward its full, has lifted itself above the eastern hills and now spreads a soft silvery light across the rooftops and the lanes and the silent green at the heart of the village. The alehouse is emptying, slowly, peacefully, in the gentle way that alehouses empty in places where there is no last call, no closing time, no rush to be elsewhere. The villagers depart in twos and threes, calling soft good nights to one another and to Wilfrida, who stands at the doorway with a small linen towel over her shoulder, smiling and bidding each of them a peaceful night. The smith is among the last to leave. He has stayed an extra cup beyond his usual hour, drawn into a long conversation with the carpenter about a piece of work that the church has commissioned, an iron candle stand for the chancel, to replace the old one whose base has become unsteady across the years. The smith and the carpenter have been discussing the design, the height, the number of branches, the kind of decoration that would suit the simple country church without overstepping into the kind of grand work that would be inappropriate for so modest a place. When at last he rises from the bench, his cup empty before him, he claps the carpenter gently on the shoulder, exchanges a few last words with the wheelwright at the next table, and steps out through the low doorway into the cool night air. The change of temperature wakes him a little from the warm drowsiness of the alehouse, and he stands for a moment beneath the painted sign of the barley sheaf, looking up at the stars. The constellations are bright tonight. He can see the plough, that great ladle of 7 stars that marks the northern sky in every season, and Cassiopeia in her chair of 5 points, and the slow drift of the great river of pale light that the country people call the Milky Way, and which the priests call by its Latin name. He cannot read the smith except for a few simple letters, but he can read the stars, and he has known them since childhood, and they are as familiar to him as the lanes of his own village. He begins his walk home, the soft cobbles of the lane cool now beneath his feet, the moonlight casting his shadow long and slender behind him. He passes the dark cottages, each of them showing a single soft glow at one or two of its windows, where the household's evening fire still burns low, or where a single candle illuminates some last small task before bed. The shutters of most of the cottages are not yet closed, for the night is mild and the air is sweet, and the villagers will close them only when they themselves are ready to lie down in their beds. From one cottage, the soft voice of a woman reaches him, singing very quietly to a child. He cannot make out the words, but the tune is familiar. An old lullaby of the country, the same lullaby his own mother sang to him 60 years ago, the same lullaby he sang to his own children, the same lullaby that his daughter Aelfwyn will sing one day, perhaps not so many years from now, to a child of her own. The lullaby drifts out of the cottage and across the lane and follows him a little of the way, like a friendly small ghost before fading into the larger silence of the village night. He passes the well at the edge of the green, the wooden roof above it casting a soft black shadow in the moonlight, and the rope still hanging quietly from the wheel where the last person to draw water this evening left it. He passes the great elm, whose massive trunk seems even larger by night than by day, and whose dark canopy of leaves whispers very softly to itself in some breeze, too light to be felt at the level of a human face. He pauses for a moment at the elm, leaning his shoulder against its rough bark, and he looks back across the green toward the dim shape of the alehouse, the soft glow of its windows, the few stragglers still standing outside its door in the quiet conversation of friends who do not quite want the evening to end. He smiles a small private smile, and he thinks, in the way that men sometimes think at the end of long days, about the smallness of his own life and the largeness of the world that contains it, and the deep good fortune that has placed him here, in this particular village, in this particular age, with this particular wife and these particular children and this particular forge waiting for him in the cool morning of the days to come. He resumes his walk, and now he passes the smithy itself, dark and silent at the end of its short track. He does not enter it tonight. He has banked the fire properly, hung the tools in their places, swept the floor, set the leather curtain across the doorway. The smithy will rest as he himself will rest, and they will both wake together in the morning, the smith and the smithy, the man and his place, the slow patient partnership that has held them both for 35 years, and will hold them both, with luck, for some years yet to come. He continues up the lane toward his own cottage, which stands at the western end of the village, just before the lane gives way to the open footpath that leads out into the fields. The cottage is dark in most of its windows, but a single soft glow shows at the small window beside the door, where Hilda has left a candle burning to welcome him home. He reaches the door, lifts the iron latch with a small click that is the most familiar sound in his entire world, and steps inside. The cottage is warm, the hearth at its centre is low now, banked for the night, and the candle on the table beside the door casts a soft round pool of amber light across the swept earthen floor. Hilda is at the hearth, kneeling, raking the coals with a small iron poker to settle them for the night. She looks up at him as he enters, and she smiles, the same smile she has been smiling at him for 32 years, and he smiles back, and no words need to be spoken between them. He removes his soft leather shoes by the door and sets them on the small wooden shelf, and he hangs his outer tunic on the peg, and he goes to her at the hearth and rests his hand for a moment upon her shoulder. She covers his hand with her own, and they remain that way for a small moment, two old companions at the warm centre of their own small world, while the candle flickers gently on the table and the night holds the village in its kind dark hand. Their daughter Aelfwyn is already in bed in the small chamber to the side of the main room, behind a curtain of woven wool. He can hear her soft breathing, the deep, slow breathing of healthy young sleep. Their son is not yet returned from the hazel coppice, but Hilda assures him that the son sent word with one of the wheelwright's apprentices, who came past the cottage in the late afternoon, that he and his companions were planning to spend the night at the small woodcutter's hut in the forest, and would return in the morning. The smith nods, satisfied, and Hilda rises from the hearth and brings him a small cup of warm spiced milk, sweetened with a spoonful of their own honey. He drinks it slowly, sitting on the bench by the hearth, while she banks the fire fully and snuffs the candle on the table. The cottage falls into the soft red darkness of the dying coals, and the smith finishes his milk, and Hilda takes his empty cup and washes it at the small basin in the corner. And they prepare themselves for bed in the slow, comfortable way of two people who have done this together for so long that no individual gesture needs to be considered. They lie down at last beneath the heavy woolen blanket, in the wooden box bed against the wall. The straw mattress beneath them is fresh, only a few weeks old, and it gives off a faint sweet scent of dried meadow grass. Hilda settles her head against his shoulder, in the place where it has fitted itself for 32 years, and the smith places his arm around her, and they lie there in the warm darkness, listening to the small, soft sounds of the cottage, the gentle settling of the timbers, the very faint hiss of the banked fire, the distant call of an owl somewhere in the western woods, and slowly, slowly they drift towards sleep. The village sleeps now, all of it. Every cottage is dark, every window shuttered or curtained, every soul gathered into the soft warm chambers of bed and blanket, and the slow steady breathing of sleep. The hearths within each cottage burn low, banked for the long hours of the night, their coals glowing the deep dim red of slow patient warmth, ready to be coaxed back to life in the cool dark hours before dawn. The moon has risen higher now, and her silver light spreads gently across the thatched roofs, turning each one into a soft pale shape, almost like the curved back of a sleeping creature, gathered close beside its neighbour in the slow companionable rest of a flock. The cobblestones of the lane have taken on a different colour beneath the moon, a deep cool blue-grey that they do not have by day, and the small pools of standing water from this morning's well-drawing reflect the moon in tiny perfect circles, scattered along the lane like coins of pale silver. The elm at the centre of the green stands silent and vast, its great dark canopy moving very slightly in some breeze too gentle to be felt below. The bell beneath its lower branches is still, and the rope hangs in a perfect plumb line beneath it, motionless in the still air. The well roof beside it casts a soft shadow upon the cropped grass, and the wooden bucket above the well mouth sways the very smallest amount, almost imperceptibly, in the deep slow breathing of the night. The smithy at the end of its short track is also dark, its leather curtain pulled fully across the doorway, the great hearth within burning so low now that only the smallest faint glow can be sensed if one were to lift the curtain and peer inside. The tools hang quietly on their pegs, the hammers and the tongs and the chisels and the punches, each in its appointed place, each waiting through the long night for the morning that will bring its hand again. The anvil sits in its quiet darkness, the working face of it still very faintly warm to the touch, holding the memory of the morning's hammer blows like a body holds the memory of an embrace. The river beyond the cottages flows on, slow and patient as it has flowed for 10,000 years, the moonlight catching on each small ripple of its surface and turning each ripple into a tiny moving star. The kingfisher who fished there in the morning is asleep now in her nest in the bank, her bright blue feathers tucked against her body, her small head folded beneath her wing. The minnows in the deep pools have settled toward the bottom, gathering close to the underside of the great flat stones, where they pass the night in some quiet fish-like dream that no human will ever understand. The fields beyond the river lie pale beneath the moon, the long strips of crop and stubble laid out in their patient orderly patterns. The barley in the eastern field has been harvested and threshed, and only the short stubble remains, golden by day and silver by night. The wheat in the southern field still stands, the ears heavy now, the stalks beginning to take on the deep gold of their full ripeness. The fallow field to the west is rough with the small green growth of the volunteer plants, the stray seedlings of last year's crops mixed with the wild grasses and the small soft flowers of the meadow. And over this rough green carpet the moonlight lies softly, like a pale silver mist. The woodland beyond the fields is dark and deep, the great old oaks and the slender ashes and the dense thickets of hazel all gathered together in the close quiet of the medieval forest. Within the woodland the small night creatures move about their secret business, the badgers in their sets, the foxes in their patient hunting, the field mice in their delicate scurrying, the owls in their slow soft swooping from branch to branch. None of these creatures concern the village. They have their own lives and their own stories and their own quiet doings, and they do not trouble the sleep of the human folk who live just beyond the wood's edge. In the cottages, the villagers sleep. Aldith the goodwife sleeps beside her husband, who is the village miller, and who has not been mentioned much in our wandering tonight, but who is a kind, quiet man, with a great brown beard and hands that smell always faintly of grain. Their 3 children sleep in the small chamber beside theirs, Edmund and Ida and little Wat, all in a single wide bed beneath a single wide blanket, their 3 small bodies curled into the warm shapes of brothers and sister. The cat sleeps at the foot of the bed, her amber eyes closed, her paws tucked beneath her soft tabby coat rising and falling with the slow, steady breathing of feline sleep. The smith sleeps beside his wife Hilda, his strong arms still around her head still on his shoulder. Their daughter Aelfwyn sleeps in the small adjoining chamber behind the woolen curtain. Their son sleeps far away tonight, in the woodcutter's hut at the edge of the forest, but he sleeps the deep, peaceful sleep of a young man who has worked hard with his friends through the day, and is tired in the good clean way that physical labour makes men tired. The wheelwright and his young wife sleep in their cottage at the southern edge of the green, with their first child in his small wicker cradle beside their bed. The carpenter and his elderly mother sleep in their cottage at the eastern edge, the mother in her own small bed by the hearth, so that the warmth might ease the small aches of her old bones. The widow Wilfrida sleeps above the alehouse, in the small chamber tucked beneath the thatch, and her young apprentice sleeps in another small chamber across the way, both of them tired from the long busy market evening. The priest sleeps in his small house beside the church, his black robe folded carefully on the chest at the foot of his bed, his book of hours open on the small table beside him, with a marker of red ribbon at the place where he stopped his evening prayers. The church itself stands silent and patient in the moonlight, its small stone tower reaching upward toward the stars, its single bell silent in its frame, its old wooden door closed and barred until the priest comes to open it again at the first light of the dawn. In the small chapel of the church, before the altar, the single small lamp of the sanctuary burns on, as it has burned every night for many decades, its tiny flame flickering very gently in the still air, its soft glow reflecting upon the polished bronze of the candlesticks and the small embroidered cloth of the altar and the dark wood of the chancel screen. This is the smallest light in the village tonight, but it is also in some quiet way the most important, for it is the light that says, even through the deepest hours of the night, that the church is here, the prayer is here, the slow patient watching of the divine is here and will be here, until the morning comes and the bell rings and the village wakes again to the new day. The night deepens, the moon climbs slowly toward her highest point. The stars wheel in their slow patient turning across the dark sky. The village sleeps, and the fields sleep, and the woodland sleeps, and the river flows on quietly, and the small night creatures move about their secret lives, and the deep slow turning of the earth carries the whole sleeping world toward the morning that is still many hours away. There is nothing anywhere that needs to be done. There is nothing anywhere that needs to be hurried. There is no demand upon any of these sleeping souls that cannot wait for the dawn. The work of the day is finished. The bread is baked. The water is drawn. The fire is banked. The animals are fed and stabled. The children are washed and tucked. The doors are shut. The windows are closed. The world is at rest, and the rest is good, and the rest is deep, and the rest is full of the slow patient peace of 900 patient years. You yourself, in your imagining, may begin to feel the long, slow drift of this peace. Your imagined feet have walked many hours through the village today, and your imagined eyes have seen many small, beautiful things, and your imagined hands have touched the rough bark of the elm, and the smooth stones of the well, and the warm leather of the smithy curtain. You are in some sense a part of this village now, a soft, small visitor woven into its slow story, and the village holds you as it holds all its own, gently, patiently, without demand. Let your shoulders sink a little deeper, now. Let your breathing slow. Let the soft images of the village drift past your eyes like the gentle rising of wood smoke into a peaceful sky, the smithy with its banked fire, the cottages with their thatched roofs, the elm at the centre of the green, the well with its wooden roof, the lane with its mossy cobbles, the hawthorn hedge at the village edge, the fields beyond, the woodland beyond the fields, the hills beyond the woodland, the stars above the hills, all of it, slowly, slowly drifting now toward the long, quiet horizon of sleep. And now, very gently, our long evening together draws toward its close. The moon has reached her highest point and has begun her slow descent toward the western horizon. The night is at its deepest, the hour before dawn, the still soft hour when even the owls grow quiet and the whole sleeping world seems to hold a single long breath. In the smithy, the banked coals have subsided to the very faintest glow, no brighter now than a few small embers half buried in their ash, and the warmth that has held the smithy through the evening has subsided with them. The leather curtain hangs still in the doorway. The tools hang still upon their pegs. The anvil has cooled at last to the same temperature as the air around it, and the great oak block beneath it is dark and patient and silent. Imagine, now, that you stand once more at the entrance to the smithy, in the way you stood at the very beginning of our journey. Imagine that the warm orange glow that pulsed from within at the start of the evening has faded entirely now, that the doorway is dark, that the hammer is still, that the smith is in his cottage with his wife asleep upon his shoulder, that the whole long, beautiful working day has been completed and laid to rest like a small good child tucked beneath a heavy blanket. The hammer is silent. The hammer that called you here, that rang across the misty meadow at the very beginning of our walk, has fallen silent. It will ring again tomorrow, when the smith rises in the cool grey of the dawn and rakes the ash from the banked coals and lays the fresh kindling upon them and works the bellows once more. But tomorrow is not yours. Tomorrow belongs to the smith, and to the village, and to the slow, patient turning of their 900-year-old life. Yours is only the night. Yours is only the long, deep, peaceful drift of sleep that lies before you now, like a quiet river flowing slowly into a dark sea. Yours is the soft, warm bed in your own century, and the soft, warm body of your own resting, and the soft, warm dreams that will come to you in the long hours that remain before your own morning calls you back to your own life. But before you drift fully away, let me leave you with a few last soft images, like small, smooth stones that you may carry with you into the deep waters of your sleep. Imagine the cobblestones of the lane, polished by centuries of footfalls, gleaming softly in the moonlight, their small dark surfaces holding the memory of every step that has ever crossed them. Imagine the thatched roofs of the cottages, layered like the feathers of a great patient bird, hunched low against the night sky, sheltering the souls who sleep beneath them. Imagine the elm at the centre of the green, vast and ancient and silent, its great dark canopy breathing very softly in the small breezes of the night, its trunk rooted deep in the earth that has held it for 300 years. Imagine the well with its wooden roof, the bucket swaying very gently above the dark water, the rope hanging in its quiet plumb line, the water cold and clean in the deep stone shaft below. Imagine the river flowing softly past the bank, the moonlight on the small ripples, the deep pools where the minnows sleep, the kingfisher in her nest with her bright blue feathers tucked against her body. Imagine the fields beyond the river, the strips of barley stubble and ripening wheat and rough green fallow, lying patient beneath the moon in the long, slow rest of the agricultural night. Imagine the woodland beyond the fields, the great old oaks and the slender ashes and the close-grown hazels, the small night creatures going quietly about their secret lives in the dappled shadows. Imagine the hills beyond the woodland, the soft rounded shapes of them in the moonlight, sleeping like ancient creatures beneath the slow-turning sky. Imagine the stars above the hills, the wide drift of the Milky Way, the patient constellations turning slowly through the long hours of the night, indifferent and eternal and kind. And imagine, last of all, the soft sleeping faces of the villagers in their cottages, Aldith and her husband and their 3 children, the smith and Hilda and their daughter, the wheelwright and his young wife and their baby, the carpenter and his elderly mother, the widow Wilfrida above the alehouse, the priest in his small house beside the church, each of them safe, each of them held, each of them woven into the warm, patient fabric of their place and their time and their slow, gentle century. The hammer is silent. The forge is dark. The doors are closed. The shutters are drawn. The candles are snuffed. The fires are banked. The animals are stabled. The children are tucked. The world is at rest, and the rest is deep, and the rest is good. Your feet, in their imagining, are turning now away from the village. The lane is taking you back toward the hawthorn gate, the same gate through which you entered so many soft hours ago. Your steps are quiet on the cobbles. Your breath is slow in the cool night air. The village is behind you, sleeping under its silver moon, and the path is opening before you, leading gently back into the mist from which you came. You pass beneath the hawthorn arch one last time. You feel as you pass the soft, cool wood of the lintel beneath an imagined fingertip, the weathered grain and the lichen, and the deep, slow memory of the oak. You thank the village silently in the way that travellers thank the kind places that have given them shelter for a night. And the village silently blesses you in the way that kind places bless their travellers, with a soft warmth that you will carry in some quiet corner of your heart for as long as you live. The path beyond the gate is dark and soft beneath your feet. The mist is rising again, low and gentle, hushing each footstep before it can be made. The hammer is silent now, fully and completely silent. Its long song ended for this night, its echo fading into the deeper silence of the great patient countryside. You walk a little way along the path. The village fades behind you. The trees thicken around you. The mist deepens. The moonlight grows softer, more diffuse, the silver of it drifting through the mist like a slow, patient breath. And now, here, in this soft, quiet place between the village and the morning, between the medieval and the modern, between the dream and the waking, you may simply stop, you may simply rest, you may simply let yourself drift, the way mist drifts, the way slow water drifts, the way the great patient earth itself drifts upon its long quiet journey through the dark. There is nothing to be done. There is nowhere to be reached. There is no task waiting for you. There is no deadline pressing upon you. There is only this long soft drift, this long slow sinking, this long deep settling into the quiet kindness of the night. Let your imagined feet rest. Let your imagined eyes close. Let the small bright images of the village fade gently into the soft grey mist of beginning sleep. The smithy, the elm, the well, the river, the fields, the woodland, the hills, the stars, all of them drifting now, all of them softening, all of them releasing you into the deeper waters of true rest. The hammer was a heartbeat, you may remember, a patient heartbeat in iron. And tonight, for these long, soft hours, you have walked through the body that the heartbeat sustained, and you have seen its rooms and its faces and its small, kind miracles. And now the heart is at rest, and the body is at rest, and you are at rest, and the long, soft night holds you all together, and there is no parting, only this quiet, shared sleep beneath the same patient moon. Sleep now, sleep deeply, sleep without dreams or with the gentlest of dreams. Sleep the slow, soft sleep of 900 patient years. The village is here, it will always be here. You may return whenever you wish. The hawthorn gate is always open, the hammer is always waiting, and the long, soft night is always, always, always ready to welcome you back into its kind, dark arms. Good night, soft traveller. Good night, slow sleeper. Good night, gentle wanderer through the long quiet centuries. Good night. Good night. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.